Book 2, Part 1 of the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia by Philip Sidney. Book 2, Part 1. In these pastoral times, a great number of days were sent to follow their flying predecessors, while the cup of poison, which was deeply tasted of the noble company, had left no sinew of theirs without mortally searching into it, yet never manifesting his venomous work, till once, that the night, parting away angry that she could distil no more sleep into the eyes of lovers, had no sooner given place to the breaking out of the morning light, and the sun bestowed his beams upon the tops of the mountains, but that the woeful Gynecia, to whom rest was no ease, had left her loathed lodging, and gotten herself into the solitary places those deserts were full of, going up and down with such unquiet motions as a grieved and hopeless mind is wont to bring forth. There appeared unto the eyes of her judgment the evil she was like to run into, with ugly infamy waiting upon them. She felt the terrors of her own conscience. She was guilty of a long exercised virtue, which made this vice the fuller of deformity. The uttermost of the good she could aspire unto was a mortal wound to her vexed spirits, and lastly, no small part of her evils was that she was wise to see her evils, insomuch that, having a great while thrown her countenance ghastly about her, as if she had called all the powers of the world to be witness of her wretched estate, at length, casting up her watery eyes to heaven, "O sun," said she, "whose unspotted light directs the steps of mortal mankind, art thou not ashamed to impart the clearness of thy presence to such a dust-creeping worm as I am? O you heavens, which continually keep the course allotted unto you, can none of your influences prevail so much upon the miserable Gynecia as to make her preserve a course so long embraced by her? O deserts, deserts, how fit a guest am I for you, since my heart can people you with wild ravenous beasts, which in you are wanting. O virtue, where dost thou hide thyself? What hideous thing is this which doth eclipse thee? Or is it true that thou wert never but a vain name, and no essential thing, which hast thus left thy professed servant when she had now need of thy lovely presence? O imperfect proportion of reason, which can too much foresee, and too little prevent! Alas, alas, said she, if there were but one hope for all my pains, or but one excuse for all my faultiness! But wretch that I am, my torment is beyond all succour, and my evil deserving doth exceed my evil fortune. For nothing else did my husband take this strange resolution to live so solitarily. For nothing else have the winds delivered this strange guest to my country. For nothing else have the destinies reserved my life to this time, but that only I, most wretched I, should become a plague to myself and a shame to womankind. Yet if my desire, how unjust soever it be, might take effect, though 1,000 deaths followed it, and every death followed with 1,000 shames, yet should not my sepulchre receive me without some contentment. But alas, though sure I am that Zelmane is such as can answer my love, yet as sure I am that this disguising must needs come for some foretaken conceit, and then, wretched Gynecia, where canst thou find any small ground plot for hope to dwell upon? No, no, it is Philoclea his heart is set upon. Is my daughter I have borne to supplant me? But if it be so, the life I have given thee, ungrateful Philoclea, I will sooner with these hands bereave thee of, than my birth shall glory she hath bereaved me of my desire. In shame there is no comfort, but to be beyond all bounds of shame." Having thus spoken, the hapless Gynecia, wandering still further, hears a lute, and to it Zelmane singing, and coming to the little arbour whence proceeded this sorrowful music, she found her love, and sinking before her on the ground, she cried, "O Zelmane, have pity on me!" Zelmane ran to her, marvelling what sudden sickness possessed her, and Gynecia would fully have discovered her passion to her, and her knowledge that she was no Amazon but a man, when they both heard footsteps, and presently saw old Basilius approach, complaining of love very freshly, and thus singing: "Let not old age disgrace my high desire, O heavenly shape in human soul contained. Old wood inflamed doth yield the bravest fire, when younger doth in smoke his virtue spend. Nor let white hairs, which on my face do grow, seem to your eyes of a disgraceful hue, since whiteness doth present the sweetest show, which makes all eyes do homage unto you." Which being done, he looked very curiously upon himself, sometimes fetching a little skip, as if he had said his strength had not yet forsaken him. But Zelmane, having in this time gotten some leisure to think for an answer, looking upon Gynecia as if she thought she did her some wrong, "Madam," said she, "I am not acquainted with those words of disguising, neither is it the profession of an Amazon, neither are you a party with whom it is to be used. If my service may please you, employ it, so long as you do me no wrong in misjudging of me." "Alas, Zelmane," said Gynecia, "I perceive you know full little how piercing the eyes are of a true lover. There is no one beam of those thoughts you have planted in me, but is able to discern a greater cloud than you do go in. Seek not to conceal yourself further from me, nor force not the passion of love into violent extremities." Zelmane, now brought to an exigent, was speedily rescued therefrom by Basilius, who, perceiving both his wife and his mistress together, dispatched his wife to the lodgeward, and falling down on his knees, proffered his love to Zelmane as to a lady who only had power to stir up more flames in so aged a breast. Worthy prince, said Zelmane, taking him up from his knees, both your manner and your words are so strange to me that I know not how to answer you. I disdain not to speak to you, mighty prince, but I disdain to speak of any matter which may bring my honour into question. And there, with a brave counterfeited scorn, she departed from the king. And thus being rid of this loving but little loved company, she longed to meet with, and she sought, her friend Dorus, that she might lay by the burden of sorrow, and therefore went toward the other lodge, where, among certain beeches, she found Dorus apparelled in flannel, with a goatskin cast upon him, and a garland of laurel mixed with cypress leaves on his head, waiting on his master Dametas, who at that time was teaching him how with his sheep-hook to catch a wanton lamb, and how with the same to cast a little clod at any one that strayed out of company. And while Dorus was practising, one might see Dametas holding his hands under his girdle behind him, nodding from the waist upwards, and swearing he never knew man go more awkwardly to work, and that they might talk of book learning what they would, but for his part, he never saw more unfeaty fellows than great clerks were. But Zelmane's coming saved Dorus from further chiding, and so she, beginning to speak with him of the number of his master's sheep, and which province of Arcadia bare the finest wool, drew him on to follow her in such country discourses, till, being out of Dametas' hearing, with such vehemency of passion as though her heart would climb into her mouth to take her tongue's office, she declared unto him upon what briars the roses of her affections grew, how time still seemed to forget her, bestowing no one hour of comfort upon her, she remaining still in one plight of ill fortune, saving so much worse as continuance of evil doth in itself increase evil. And thus having poured into the friendly bosom of Dorus her many chances and her ill success, Zelmane prayed her friend also to unburthen his griefs, and to bestow upon her a map of his little world, that she might judge whether he had been equally the spite and plaything of fortune. Thus besought, Dorus entered to the description of his fortune. After that by your means I was exalted to serve in yonder blessed lodge, for a while I had in the furnace of my agonies this refreshing, that, because of the service I had done in killing of the bear, it pleased the princess, in whom indeed stateliness shines through courtesy, to let fall some gracious look upon me, sometimes to see my exercises, sometimes to hear my songs. For my part, my heart would not suffer me to omit any occasion whereby I might make the incomparable Pamela see how much extraordinary devotion I bear to her service, and withal strave to appear more worthy in her sight, that small desert, joined to so great affection, might prevail something in the wisest lady. But too well, alas, I found that a shepherd's service was but considered of as from a shepherd, and the acceptation limited to no further proportion than of a good servant. And when my countenance had once given notice that there lay affection under it, I saw straight majesty, sitting in the throne of beauty, draw forth such a sword of just disdain, that I remained as a man thunderstricken, not daring, no, not able, to behold that power. Now to make my estate known seemed again impossible, by reason of the suspiciousness of Dametas, Meso, and my young mistress Mopsa. For Dametas, according to the constitution of a dull head, thinks no better way to show himself wise than by suspecting everything in his way, which suspicion Meso, for the hoggish shrewdness of her brain, and Mopsa, for a very unlikely envy she hath stumbled upon against the princess's unspeakable beauty, were very glad to execute. So that I, finding my service by this means lightly regarded, my affection despised, and myself unknown, remained no fuller of desire than void of counsel how to come to my desire. At last I lighted and resolved on this way, which yet perchance you will think was a way rather to hide it. I began to counterfeit the extremest love toward Mopsa that might be, and as for the love, so lively it was indeed within me, although to another subject, that little I needed to counterfeit any notable demonstrations of it. And so making a contrariety the place of my memory, in her foulness I beheld Pamela's fairness, still looking on Mopsa, but thinking on Pamela, as if I saw my sun shine in a puddled water. I cried out of nothing but Mopsa. To Mopsa my attendance was directed. To Mopsa the best fruits I could gather were brought. To Mopsa it seemed still that mine eye conveyed my tongue, so that Mopsa was my saying, Mopsa was my singing, Mopsa, that is only suitable in laying a foul complexion upon a filthy favour, setting forth both in sluttishness, she was the lodestar of my life, she the blessing of mine eyes, she the overthrow of my desires, and yet the recompense of my overthrow, she the sweetness of my heart, even sweetening the death which her sweetness drew upon me. In sum, whatsoever I thought of Pamela, that I said to Mopsa, whereby, as I gat my master's goodwill, who before spited me, fearing lest I should win the princess's favour from him, so did the same make the princess the better content to allow me her presence, whether indeed it were that a certain spark of noble indignation did rise in her not to suffer such a baggage to win away anything of hers, how meanly soever she reputed of it, or rather, as I think, my words being so passionate and shooting so quite contrary from the marks of Mopsa's worthiness, she perceived well enough whither they were directed, and therefore, being so masked, she was contented, as a sport of wit, to attend them. Whereupon one day, determining to find some means to tell, as of a third person, the tale of mine own love and estate, finding Mopsa, like a cuckoo by a nightingale, alone with Pamela, I came in unto them, and with a face, I am sure, full of cloudy fancies, took a harp and sung this song: Since so mine eyes are subject to your sight, that in your sight they fixed have my brain, since so my heart is filled with that light, that only light doth all my life maintain, since in sweet hue all good so richly reign, that where you are no wished good can want, since so your living image lives in me, that in myself yourself true love doth plant, how can you him unworthy then decree, in whose chief part your worths implanted be? The song being ended, I let fall my harp from me, and casting mine eye sometime on Mopsa, I fixed my look upon Pamela. O Mopsa, Mopsa, said I, if my heart could be as manifest to you as it is uncomfortable to me, I doubt not the height of my thoughts should well countervail the lowness of my quality. But let not an excellent spirit do itself such wrong as to think where it is placed, embraced, and loved, there can be any unworthiness, since the weakest mist is not easilier driven away by the sun than that is chased away with so high thoughts. I will not deny, answered the gracious Pamela, but that the love you bear to Mopsa hath brought you to the consideration of her virtues, and that consideration may have made you the more virtuous, and so the more worthy. But even that, then, you must confess, you have received of her, and so are rather gratefully to thank her, than to press any further till you bring something of your own whereby to claim it. And truly, Dorus, I must in Mopsa's behalf say thus much to you, that if her beauties have so overtaken you, it becomes a true lover to have your heart more set upon her good than your own, and to bear a tenderer respect to her honour than your satisfaction. Now, by my halliday, madam, said Mopsa, throwing a great number of sheep's eyes upon me, you have even touched mine own mind to the quick, forsooth. And this policy of mine meeting with good hap, I had one day a chance, while railing at filthy fortune, to picture my own misfortunes and the high estate of the princess, while I had a shrewd care of the jealous Mopsa. For while Pamela graciously hearkened, I told my tale in this sort. In the country of Thessalia, alas, why name I that accursed country, which brings forth nothing but matters for tragedies? But name it I must. In Thessalia, I say, there was, well may I say there was, a prince. No prince whom bondage wholly possessed, but yet accounted a prince. I name Musidorus. O Musidorus, Musidorus! But to what serve exclamations, where there are no ears to receive the sound? This Musidorus, being yet in the tenderest age, his worthy father paid to nature, with a violent death, her last duties, leaving his child to the faith of his friends and the proof of time. Death gave him not such pangs as the foresightful care he had of his silly successor. And yet, if in his foresight he could have seen so much, happy was that good prince in his timely departure, which barred him from the knowledge of his son's miseries, which his knowledge could neither have prevented nor relieved. The young Musidorus being thus, as for the first pledge of the destinies' goodwill, deprived of his principal stay, was yet for some years after, as if the stars would breathe themselves for a greater mischief, lulled up in as much good luck as the heedful love of his doleful mother, and the flourishing estate of his country could breed unto him. But when the time now came that misery seemed to be ripe for him, because he had age to know misery, I think there was a conspiracy in all heavenly and earthly things to frame fit occasions to lead him unto it. His people, to whom all foreign matters in foretime were odious, began to wish in their beloved prince experience by travel. His dear mother, whose eyes were held open only with the joy of looking upon him, did now dispense with the comfort of her widowed life, desiring the same her subjects did, for the increase of her son's worthiness. And here too did Musidorus' own virtue, see how virtue can be a minister to mischief, sufficiently provoke him, for indeed thus much must I say for him, although the likeness of our mishaps makes me presume to pattern myself unto him, that well-doing was at that time his scope, from which no faint pleasure could withhold him. But the present occasion which did knit all this together was his uncle, the king of Macedon, who having lately before gotten such victories as were beyond expectation, did at this time send both for the prince his son, brought up together, to avoid the wars, with Musidorus, and for Musidorus himself, that his joy might be the more full, having such partakers of it. But alas! to what a sea of miseries my plainful tongue doth lead me, and thus out of breath, rather with that I thought than that I said, I stayed my speech, till Pamela, showing by countenance that such was her pleasure, I thus continued it. These two young princes, to satisfy the king, took their way by sea towards Thrace, whither they would needs go with a navy to succour him, he being at that time before Byzantium, with a mighty army besieging it, where at that time his court was. But when the conspired heavens had gotten this subject of their wrath upon so fit a place as the sea was, they straight began to breathe out in boisterous winds some part of their malice against him, so that with the loss of all his navy, he only, with the prince his cousin, were cast aland, and far off. O cruel winds, in your unconsiderate rages, why either began you this fury, or why did you not end it in his end? But your cruelty was such as you would spare his life for many deathful torments. To tell you what pitiful mishaps fell to the young prince of Macedon his cousin, I should too much fill your ears with strange horrors, neither will I stay upon those laboursome adventures, nor loathsome misadventures, to which, and through which, his fortune and courage conducted him. My speech hasteneth itself to come to the full point of Musidorus' infortunes. For as we find the most pestilent diseases do gather into themselves all the infirmities with which the body before was annoyed, so did his last misery embrace in extremity of itself all his former mischiefs. Arcadia was the place prepared to be the stage of his endless overthrow. Arcadia was, alas, well might I say it is, the charmed circle where all his spirits for ever should be enchanted. For here, and nowhere else, did his infected eyes make his mind know what power heavenly beauty had to throw it down to hellish agonies. Here did he see the Arcadian king's eldest daughter, in whom he forthwith placed so all his hopes of joy and joyful parts of his heart, that he left in himself nothing but a maze of longing and a dungeon of sorrow. But alas, what can saying make them believe whom seeing cannot persuade? Those pains must be felt before they can be understood. No outward utterance can command a conceit. Such was as then the state of the king, as it was no time by direct means to seek her. And such was the state of his captive will, as he could delay no time of seeking her. In this entangled cause he clothed himself in a shepherd's weed, that under the baseness of that form he might at least have free access to feed his eyes with that which should at length eat up his heart, in which doing, thus much without doubt he hath manifested, that this estate is not always to be rejected, since under that veil there may be hidden things to be esteemed. And if he might, with taking on a shepherd's look, cast up his eyes to the fairest princess nature in that time created, the like, nay, the same desire of mine need no more to be disdained or held for disgraceful. But now, alas, mine eyes wax dim, my tongue begins to falter, and my heart to want force to help either, with the feeling remembrance I have in what heap of miseries the caitiff prince lay at this time buried. Pardon, therefore, most excellent princess, if I cut off the course of my dolorous tale, since, if I be understood, I have said enough for the defence of my baseness, and for that which after might befall to that pattern of ill fortune, the matters are too monstrous for my capacity. His hateful destinies must best declare their own workmanship. Thus having delivered my tale in this perplexed manner, to the end the princess might judge that he meant himself who spake so feelingly, her answer was both strange and, in some respect, comfortable. For would you think it, she hath heard heretofore of us both, by means of the valiant Prince Plangus, and particularly of our casting away, which she, following mine own style, thus delicately brought forth. You have told, said she, Dorus, a pretty tale, but you are much deceived in the latter end of it. For the Prince Musidorus, with his cousin Pyrocles, did both perish upon the coast of Laconia, as a noble gentleman called Plangus, who was well acquainted with the history, did assure my father. O how that speech of hers did pour joys into my heart! O blessed name, thought I, of mine, since thou hast been in that tongue, and passed through those lips, though I can never hope to approach him. As for Pyrocles, said I will not deny it, but that he is perished. Which I said, lest sooner suspicion might arise of your being here than yourself would have it, and yet affirm no lie unto her, since I only said I would not deny it. But for Musidorus, said I perceive indeed you have either heard or read the story of that unhappy prince, for this was the very objection which that peerless princess did make unto him, when he sought to appear such as he was before her wisdom, and thus, as I have read it fair written in the certainty of my knowledge, he might answer her that indeed the ship wherein he came by a treason was perished, and therefore that Plangus might easily be deceived, but that he himself was cast upon the coast of Laconia, where he was taken up by a couple of shepherds who lived in those days famous, for that both loving one fair maid, they yet remain constant friends, one of whose songs not long since was sung before you by the shepherd layman, and brought by them to a nobleman's house near Mantinea, whose son had a little before his marriage been taken prisoner, and by the help of this Prince Musidorus, though naming himself by another name, was delivered. Now these circumlocutions I did use, because of the one side I knew the princess would know well the parties I meant, and of the other, if I should have named Strephon, Cleas, Calendar, and Clytophon, perhaps it would have rubbed some conjecture into the heavy head of Mistress Mopsa. Therefore, most divine lady, Plangus might well err who knew not of any's taking up. Lastly, for a certain demonstration, he presumed to show unto the princess a mark he had on his face, as I might, said I, show this of my neck to the rare Mopsa, and withal showed my neck to them both. where, as you know, there is a red spot-bearing figure, as they tell me, of a lion's paw, that she may ascertain herself that I am Menalca's brother. And so did he, beseeching her to send someone she might trust into Thessalia, secretly to be advertised whether the age, the complexion, and particularly that notable sign did not fully agree with their Prince Musidorus. Do you not know further, said she, with a settled countenance, not accusing any kind of inward emotion, of that story? Alas, no, said I, for even here the historiographer stopped, saying the rest belonged to astrology. And therewith, partly to bring Mopsa again to the matter, lest she should too much take heed to our discourses, but principally, if it were possible, to gather some comfort out of her answers, I kneeled down to the princess and humbly besought her to move Mopsa in my behalf, that she would unarm her noble heart of that steely resistance against the sweet blows of love. That since all her parts were decked with some particular ornament, her face with beauty, her head with wisdom, her eyes with majesty, her countenance with gracefulness, her lips with loveliness, that she would make her heart the throne of pity, being the most excellent raiment of the most excellent part. But Pamela, without any show of favour or disdain, either of heeding or neglecting what I had said, turned her speech to Mopsa with such a voice and action as showed she spake of a matter which did little concern her, so that I was well nigh driven to submit to the tyranny of despair. But as Dorus was about to tell further, Demetus, who came whistling, and counting upon his fingers how many load of hay 17 fat oxen eat up in a year, desired Zelmane from the king that she would come into the lodge where they stayed for her. Alas, said Dorus, taking his leave, the sum is this, that you may well find you have beaten your sorrow against such a wall, which with the force of a rebound may well make your sorrow stronger. But Zelmane, turning her speech to Demetus, I shall grow, said she, skilful in country matters, if I have often conference with your servant. In sooth, answered Demetus, with a graceless scorn, the lad may prove well enough, if he oversoon think not too well of himself, and will bear away that he heareth of his elders. And therewith, as they walked to the other lodge, to make Zelmane find she might have spent her time better with him, he began with a wild method to run over all the art of husbandry, especially employing his tongue about well-dunging of a field, while poor Zelmane yielded her ears to those tedious strokes, not warding them so much as with any one answer, till they came to Basilius and Gynecia, who attended for her in a coach, to carry her abroad to see some sports prepared for her. Basilius and Gynecia, sitting in the one end, placed her at the other, with her left side to Philoclea. Zelmane was moved in her mind to have kissed their feet, for the favour of so blessed a seat, for the narrowness of the coach made them join from the foot to the shoulders very close together, the true touch whereof, though it were barred by their envious apparel, yet, as a perfect magnet, though but in an ivory box, will through the box send forth his embracing virtue to a beloved needle. So this emparadised neighbourhood made Zelmane's soul cleave unto her, both through the ivory case of her body, and the apparel which did overcloud it. The sports having been witnessed, the awkward Demetus, who drove home half sleeping, half musing, about the mending of a winepress, overturned the coach on the great stub of a tree. Gynecia was only hurt, having her shoulder put out of joint, which, though it were well set by one of the falconer's cunning, yet gave her much pain, and drave her to her bed. Misdoubting that this might give occasion to Zelmane, whom she misdoubted, therefore she called Philoclea to her, and though it were late in the night, commanded her in her ear to go to the other lodge, and send Miso to her, with whom she would speak, and she to lie with her sister Pamela. The meanwhile Gynecia kept Zelmane with her, because she would be sure she should be out of the lodge before she licensed Zelmane. Philoclea, not skilled in anything better than obedience, went quietly down, and the moon then full, not thinking scorn to be a torch-bearer to such beauty, guided her steps. And alas, sweet Philoclea, how hath my pen till now forgot thy passions, since to thy memory principally all this long matter is intended? Pardon the slackness to come to those woes which, having caused in others, thou didst feel in thyself. The sweet-minded Philoclea was in their degree of well-doing, to whom the not knowing of evil serveth for a ground of virtue, and hold their inward powers in better form with an unspotted simplicity, than many who rather cunningly seek to know what goodness is, than willingly take into themselves the following of it. But as that sweet and simple breath of heavenly goodness is the easier to be altered, because it hath not passed through the worldly wickedness, nor feelingly found the evil that evil carries with it, so now the lady Philoclea, whose eyes and senses had received nothing but according as the natural course of each thing required, whose tender youth had obediently lived under her parents' behests, without framing out of her own will the forechoosing of anything, when now she came to a point wherein her judgment was to be practised in knowing faultiness by his first tokens, she was like a young fawn who, coming in the wind of the hunters, doth not know whether it be a thing or no to be eschewed, whereof at this time she began to get a costly experience. For after that Zelmane had a while lived in the lodge with her, and that her only being a noble stranger had bred a kind of heedful attention, her coming to that lonely place, where she had nobody but her parents, a willingness of conversation, her wit and behaviour a liking and silent admiration, At length the excellency of her natural gifts, joined with the extreme show she made of most devout, honouring Philoclea, carrying thus in one person the only two bands of goodwill, loveliness and lovingness, brought forth in her heart a yielding to a most friendly affection, which, when it had gotten to full possession of the keys of her mind, that it would receive no message from her senses without that affection were the interpreter, then straight grew an exceeding delight still to be with her, with an unmeasurable liking of all that Zelmane did, matters being so turned in her that, where at first liking her manners did breed goodwill, now goodwill became the chief cause of liking her manners, so that within a while Zelmane was not prized for her demeanour, but the demeanour was prized because it was Zelmane's. Then followed that most natural effect of conforming herself to that which she did like, and not only wishing to be herself such another in all things, but to ground an imitation upon so much an esteemed authority. At last she fell in acquaintance with love's harbinger, wishing. First she would wish that they two might live all their lives together, like two of Diana's nymphs, but that wish she thought not sufficient, because she knew there would be more nymphs besides them, who also would have their part in Zelmane. Then would she wish that she were her sister, that such a natural band might make her more special to her. But against that she considered that, though being her sister, if she happened to be married, she should be robbed of her. Then grown bolder, she would wish either herself or Zelmane a man, that there might succeed a blessed marriage between them. But when that wish had once displayed his ensign in her mind, then followed whole squadrons of longings that so it might be, with a main battle of mislikings and repinings against their creation, that so it was not. But as some diseases, when they are easy to be cured, they are hard to be known, but when they grow easy to be known, they are almost impossible to be cured, so the sweet Philoclea, while she might prevent it, she did not feel it. Now she felt it when it was past preventing, like a river, no rampiers being built against it till already it have overflowed. For now indeed love pulled off his mask, and showed his face unto her, and told her plainly that she was his prisoner. But the principal cause that invited her remembrance was a goodly white marble stone, that should seem had been dedicated in ancient time to the sylvan gods, which she finding there a few days before Zelmane's coming, had written these words upon it, a testimony of her mind against the suspicion her captivity made her think she lived in. The writing was this: You living powers, enclosed in stately shrine of growing trees, you rural gods that wield your sceptres here, if to your ears divine a voice may come which troubled soul doth yield, this vow receive, this vow, O gods, maintain, my virgin life no spotted thought shall stain. Thou purest stone, whose pureness doth present my purest mind, whose temper hard doth show my tempered heart, by thee my promise sent, unto myself let after livers know. No fancy mine, nor others wrong suspect, make me, O virtuous shame, thy laws neglect. O chastity, the chief of heavenly lights, which makes us most immortal shape to wear, hold thou my heart, establish thou my sprites, to only thee my constant course I bear, till spotless soul unto thy bosom fly, such life to lead, such death I vow to die. Alas then, O love, why dost thou in thy beautiful sampler set such a work for my desire to take out, which is as much impossible? And yet, alas, why do I thus condemn my fortune before I hear what she can say for herself? What do I, silly wench, know what love hath prepared for me? Do I not see my mother as well, at least as furiously as myself, love Zelmane? And should I be wiser than my mother? Either she sees a possibility in that which I think impossible, or else impossible loves need not misbecome me. And do I not see Zelmane, who doth not think a thought which is not first weighed by wisdom and virtue? Doth not she vouchsafe to love me with like ardour? I see it, her eyes depose it to be true. What then? And if she can love poor me, shall I think scorn to love such a woman as Zelmane? Away then all vain examinations of why and how. Thou lovest me, most excellent Zelmane, and I love thee. And with that, embracing the ground whereon she lay, she said to herself, for even to herself she was ashamed to speak it out in words, O my Zelmane, govern and direct me, for I am wholly given over unto thee. And now Dametas and Meso, who were round about to seek her, having found her, Meso swearing that, were it her daughter Mopsa, she would give her a lesson for walking so late, Philoclea went alone to her sister's, Pamela's chamber, where she found her sitting in a chair, lying backward with her head almost over the back of it, and looking upon a wax candle which burnt before her, in one hand holding a letter, in the other her handkerchief, which had lately drunk up the tears of her eyes, leaving instead of them crimson circles, like red flakes in the element when the weather is hottest, which Philoclea finding, for her eyes had learned to know the badges of sorrow, she earnestly entreated to know the cause thereof, that either she might comfort or accompany her doleful humour. But Pamela, rather seeming sorry that she had perceived so much, than willing to open any further, O my Pamela, said Philoclea, who are to me a sister in nature, a mother in counsel, a princess by the law of our country, and, which name methinks of all others the dearest, a friend by my choice and your favour, what means this banishing me from your counsels? Do you love your sorrow so well as to grudge me part of it? Or do you think I shall not love a sad Pamela so well as a joyful? or be my ears unworthy, or my tongue suspected? What is it, my sister, that you should conceal from your sister, yea, and servant Philoclea? End of Book 2, Part 1. Book 2, Part 2 of The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia by Philip Sidney. Book 2, Part 2. These words won no further of Pamela, but that telling her they might talk better as they lay together, they impoverished their clothes to enrich their bed, which for that night might well scorn the shrine of Venus. And there, cherishing one another with dear, though chaste embracements, with sweet, though cold kisses, it might seem that love was come to play him there without dart, or that, weary of his own fires, he was there to refresh himself between their sweet breathing lips. But Philoclea earnestly again entreated Pamela to open her grief, who had first dissembled, but at last adjured Philoclea to take warning by her example. Alas, thought Philoclea to herself, your shears come too late to clip the bird's wings that already is flown away. But then Pamela, being once set in the stream of her love, went away amain, withal telling her how his noble qualities had drawn her liking towards him, but yet ever weighing his meanness, and so held continually in due limits, till, seeking many means to speak with her, and ever kept from it, as well because she shunned it, seeing and disdaining his mind, as because of her jealous jailers, he had at length used the finest policy that might be, in counterfeiting love to Mopsa, and saying to Mopsa whatever he would have her know, and in how passionate manner he had told his own tale in a third person, making poor Mopsa believe that it was a matter fallen out many ages before. And in the end, because you shall know my tears come not neither of repentance nor misery, who, think you, is my Dorus fallen out to be? Even the Prince Musidorus, famous over all Asia for his heroical enterprises, of whom you remember how much good the stranger Plangus told my father, he not being drowned, as Plangus thought, though his cousin Pyrocles indeed perished. Ah, my sister, if you had heard his words, or seen his gestures, when he made me know what and to whom his love was, you would have matched in yourself those two rarely matched together, pity and delight. A few days since he and Dametas had furnished themselves very richly to run at the ring before me. Oh, how mad a sight it was to see Dametas, like rich tissue furred with lambskins. But oh, how well it did with Dorus, to see with what a grace he presented himself before me on horseback, making majesty wait upon humbleness. How at the first, standing still with his eyes bent upon me, as though his motions were chained to my look, he so stayed till I caused Mopsa bid him do something upon his horse, which no sooner said, but, with a kind rather of quick gesture than show of violence, you might see him come towards me, beating the ground in so due time, as no dancer can observe better measure. If you remember the ship we saw once when the sea went high upon the coast of Argos, so went the beast, but he, as if centaur-like, he had been on peace with the horse, was no more moved than one with the going of his own legs, and in effect so did he command him as his own limbs, for though he had both spurs and wand, they seemed rather marks of sovereignty than instruments of punishment, his hand and leg, with most pleasing grace, commanding without threatening, and rather remembering than chastising, at least if sometimes he did. It was so stolen as neither our eyes could discern it, nor the horse with any change did complain of it, he ever going so just with the horse, either forthright or turning, that it seemed as he borrowed the horse's body, so he lent the horse his mind. In the turning one might perceive the bridle hand something gently stir, but indeed so gently as it did rather distil virtue than use violence. Himself, which methinks is strange, showing at one instant both steadiness and nimbleness, sometimes making him turn close to the ground, like a cat when scratchingly she wheels about after a mouse, sometimes with a little more rising before, now like a raven leaping from ridge to ridge, then like one of Demeter's kids bound over the hillocks, and also done as neither the lusty kind showed any roughness, nor the easier any idleness, but still like a well-obeyed master, whose beck is enough for a discipline, ever concluding each thing he did with his face to mewards, as if thence came not only the beginning but ending of his motions. The sport was to see Dametas, how he was tossed from the saddle to the mane of the horse, and thence to the ground, giving his gay apparel almost as foul an outside as it had an inside. But, as before he had ever said he wanted but horse and apparel, to be as brave a courtier as the best, so now, bruised with proof, he proclaimed it a folly for a man of wisdom to put himself under the tuition of a beast. So as Dorus was fain alone to take the ring, wherein truly at least my womanish eyes could not discern, but that taking his staff from his thigh, the descending it a little down, the getting of it up into the rest, the letting of the point fall, and taking the ring, was but all one motion. At least, if they were divers motions, they did so stealingly slip one into another as the latter part was ever in hand, before the eye could discern the former was ended. Indeed, Dametas found fault that he showed no more strength in shaking off his staff, but to my conceit the fine cleanness of bearing it was exceeding delightful. One time he danced the Matachin dance in armour. Oh, with what a graceful dexterity! I think to make me see that he had been brought up in such exercises. Another time he persuaded his master, to make my time seem shorter, in manner of a dialogue, to play Priamus while he played Paris. Tell me, sweet Philoclea, did you ever see such a shepherd? Tell me, did you ever hear of such a prince? And then tell me if a small or unworthy assault have conquered me. Truly, I would hate my life, if I thought vanity led me. See what a letter this is, which to-day he delivered me, pretending before Mopsa that I should read it unto her, to mollify, forsooth, her iron stomach. With that she read the letter, containing thus much. Most blessed paper, which shalt kiss that hand whereto all blessedness is in nature a servant, do not disdain to carry with thee the woeful words of a miser now despairing, neither be afraid to appear before her, bearing the base title of the sender. For no sooner shall that divine hand touch thee, but that thy baseness shall be turned to most high preferment. Therefore mourn boldly, my ink, for while she looks upon you, your blackness will shine. Cry out boldly, my lamentation, for while she reads you, your cries will be music. Say then, O happy messenger of a most unhappy message, that the too soon born and too late dying creature, which dares not speak, no, not look, no, not scarcely think, as from his miserable self, unto her heavenly highness, only presumes to desire thee, in the times that her eyes and voice do exalt thee, to say, and in this manner to say, not from him, oh no, that were not fit, but of him, thus much unto her sacred judgment. O you, the only honour to women, to men the only admiration, you that being armed by love defy him that armed you, in this high estate wherein you have placed me, yet let me remember him to whom I am bound for bringing me to your presence. And let me remember him who, since he is yours, how mean soever he be, it is reason you have an account of him. The wretch, yet your wretch, though with languishing steps, runs fast to his grave. And will you suffer a temple, how poorly built soever, but yet a temple of your deity, to be razed? But he dieth, it is most true, he dieth, and he in whom you live, to obey you, dieth. Wherefore, though he plain, he doth not complain, for it is a harm, but no wrong, which he hath received. He dies, because in woeful language all his senses tell him that such is your pleasure. For since you will not that he live, alas, alas, what followeth? What followeth of the most ruined Dorus but his end? End then, evil-destined Dorus, end, and end, thou woeful letter, end. For it sufficeth her wisdom to know that her heavenly will shall be accomplished. O my Philoclea, is he a person to write these words? And are these words lightly to be regarded? But if you had seen when, with trembling hand, he had delivered, how he went away, as if he had been but the coffin that carried himself to his sepulchre. 2 times, I must confess, I was about to take courtesy into mine eyes. But both times the former resolution stopped the entry of it, so that he departed without obtaining any further kindness. But he was no sooner out of the door, but that I looked to the door kindly. And truly the fear of him ever since hath put me into such perplexity as now you found me. Ah, my Pamela, leave sorrow. The river of your tears will soon lose his fountain. It is in your hand as well to stitch up his life again as it was before to rend it. And so, though with self-grieved mind, she comforted her sister, till sleep came to bathe himself in Pamela's fair weeping eyes, which when Philoclea found, wringing her hands, O me, said she, indeed the only subject of the destiny's displeasure, whose greatest fortunateness is more unfortunate than my sister's greatest unfortunateness. Alas, she weeps because she would be no sooner happy. I weep because I can never be happy. Her tears flow from pity, mine from being too far lower than the reach of pity. Yet do I not envy thee, dear Pamela, I do not envy thee, only I could wish that, being thy sister in nature, I were not so far off akin in fortune. But the darkness of sorrow overshadowing her mind, as the night did her eyes, they were both content to hide themselves under the wings of sleep, till the next morning had almost lost his name, when Miso came with a slavering good morrow, telling them it was a shame to mar their conditions, and their complexions too, with lying too long abed, that when she was of their age, she would have made a handkerchief by that time a day. The 2 sweet princesses, with a smiling silence, answered her entertainment, and obeying her direction, covered their dainty beauties with the glad clothes. But as soon as Pamela was ready, and sooner she was than her sister, of the agony of Dorus giving a fit to herself, which the words of his letter, lively imprinted in her mind, still remembered her of, she called to Mopsa and willed her to fetch Dorus to speak with her, because, she said, she would take further judgment of him before she would move Dametas to grant her in marriage unto him. Mopsa, as glad as of sweetmeat to go of such an errand, quickly returned with Dorus to Pamela, who intended both, by speaking with him, to give some comfort to his passionate heart, and withal to hear some part of his life past, which, although fame had already delivered unto her, yet she desired in more particular certainties to have it from so beloved an historian. Yet the sweetness of virtue's disposition, jealous even over itself, suffered her not to enter abruptly into questions of Musidorus, whom she was half ashamed she did love so well, and more than half sorry she could love no better, but thought best first to make her talk arise of Pyrocles and his virtuous father, which thus she did. Dorus, said she, you told me the last day that Plangus was deceived in that he affirmed the Prince Musidorus was drowned, but withal you confessed his cousin Pyrocles perished, of whom certainly in that age there was a great loss, since, as I have heard, he was a young prince of whom all men expected as much as man's power could bring forth, and yet virtue promised for him their expectation should not be deceived. Most excellent lady, said Dorus, no expectation in others, nor hope in himself, could aspire to a higher mark than to be thought worthy to be praised by your judgment, and made worthy to be praised by your mouth. But most sure it is that, as his fame could by no means get so sweet and noble air to fly in as in your breath, so could not you, leaving yourself aside, find in the world a fitter subject of commendation, as noble as the long succession of royal ancestors, famous, and famous for victories could make him, of shape most lovely, and yet of mind more lovely, valiant, courteous, wise. What should I say more? Sweet Pyrocles, excellent Pyrocles, what can my words but wrong thy perfections, which I would to God in some small measure thou hadst bequeathed to him that ever must have thy virtues in admiration, that mast, at least, in them I might have found some more gracious acceptation. With that he imprisoned his look for a while upon Mopsa, who thereupon fell into a very wide smiling. Truly, said Pamela, Dorus, I like well your mind, that can raise itself out of so base a fortune as yours is, to think of the imitating so excellent a prince as Pyrocles was, who shoots at the midday sun, though he be sure he shall never hit the mark, yet as sure he is he shall shoot higher than who aims but at a bush. But I pray you, Dorus, said she, tell me, since I perceive you are well acquainted with that story, what prince was that Euarchus, father to Pyrocles, of whom so much fame goes for his rightly royal virtues, or by what ways he got that opinion, and then so descend to the causes of his sending first away from him, and then to him, for that excellent son of his, with the discourse of his life and loss. And therein you may, if you list, say something of that same Musidorus his cousin, because they going together, the story of Pyrocles, which I only desire, may be the better understood. Incomparable lady, said he, your commandment doth not only give me the will, but the power to obey you, such influence hath your excellency. This king, left orphan both of father and mother, whose father and grandfather likewise had died young, he found his estate, when he came to the age which allowed his authority, so disjointed even in the noblest and strongest limbs of government, that the name of a king was grown even odious to the people, his authority having been abused by those great lords and little kings who, in those between times of reigning, by unjust favouring those that were partially theirs, and oppressing them that would defend their liberty against them, had brought in, by a more felt than seen manner of proceeding, the worst kind of oligarchy, that is, when men are governed indeed by a few, and yet are not taught to know what those few be, to whom they should obey. For they, having the power of kings, but not the nature of kings, use the authority as men do their farms, of which they see within a year they shall go out. And so there were offices sold, public defences neglected, and in some wit abused, rather to feign reason why it should be amiss than how it should be amended. In short, peerless princess, I might easily set down the whole art of government, but must tell you the history of King Euarchus. He had only one sister, a lady, lest I should too easily fall to partial praises of her, of whom it may be justly said that she was no unfit branch to the noble stock whereof she was come. Her he had given in marriage to Dorilaus, Prince of Thessalia, not so much to make a friendship as to confirm the friendship between their posterity, which between them, by the likeness of virtue, had been long before made. For certainly Dorilaus could need no amplifier's mouth for the highest point of praise. Dorilaus, having married his sister, had his marriage in short time blessed, for so are folks wont to say, how unhappy soever the children after grow, with a son, whom they name Musidorus, of whom I must needs first speak before I come to Pyrocles, because, as he was born first, so upon his occasion grew, as I may say accidentally, the other's birth. For scarcely was Musidorus made partaker of this oft blinding light, when there were found numbers of soothsayers, who affirmed strange and incredible things should be performed by that child, whether the heavens at that time listed to play with ignorant mankind, or that flattery be so presumptuous as even at times to borrow the face of divinity, but certainly so did the boldness of their affirmation accompany the greatness of what they did affirm, even descending to particularities, what kingdoms he should overcome, that the king of Phrygia, who over superstitiously thought himself touched in the matter, sought by force to destroy the infant, to prevent his after expectations, because a skilful man, having compared his nativity with the child, so told him. Foolish man, either vainly fearing what was not to be feared, or not considering that, if it were a work of the superior powers, the heavens at length are never children. But so he did, and by the aid of the kings of Lydia and Crete, joining together their armies, invaded Thessalia, and brought Dorilaus to some behindhand of fortune, when his faithful friend and brother Euarchus came so mightily to his succour that, with some interchanging changes of fortune, they begat of a just war the best child, peace. In which time Euarchus made a cross marriage also with Dorilaus his sister, and shortly left her with child of the famous Pyrocles, driven to return to the defence of his own country, which in his absence, helped with some of the ill-contented nobility, the mighty king of Thrace and his brother king of Pannonia had invaded. The success of those wars was too notable to be unknown to your ears, to which it seems all worthy fame hath glory to come unto. But there was Dorilaus, valiantly requiting his friend's help, in a great battle deprived of life, his obsequies being no more solemnized by the tears of his partakers than the blood of his enemies, with so piercing a sorrow to the constant heart of Euarchus, that the news of his son's birth could lighten his countenance with no show of comfort, although all the comfort that might be in a child truth itself in him forthwith delivered. For what fortune only soothsayers foretold of Musidorus, that all men might see prognosticated in Pyrocles, both heavens and earth giving tokens of the coming forth of an heroical virtue. The senate house of the planets was at no time so set for the decreeing perfection in a man, as at that time all folks skilful therein did acknowledge. Only love was threatened and promised to him, and so to his cousin, as both the tempest and haven of their best years. But as death may have prevented Pyrocles, so unworthiness must be the death of Musidorus. But the mother of Pyrocles, shortly after her childbirth dying, was caused that Euarchus recommended the care of his only son to his sister, doing it the rather because the war continued in cruel heat betwixt him and those ill neighbours of his, in which meantime those young princes, the only comforters of that virtuous widow, grew on so, that Pyrocles taught admiration to the hardest conceits. Musidorus, perchance because among his subjects exceedingly beloved, and by the good order of Euarchus, well performed by his sister, they were so brought up that all the sparks of virtue which nature had kindled in them were so blown to give forth their uttermost heat, that justly it may be affirmed they inflamed the affections of all that knew them. Among which nothing I so much delight to recount as the memorable friendship that grew betwixt the two princes, such as made them more like than the likeness of all other virtues, and made them more near one to the other than the nearness of their blood could aspire unto, which I think grew the faster, and the faster was tied between them, by reason that Musidorus being elder by 3 or 4 years, it was neither so great a difference in age as did take away the delight in society, and yet by the difference there was taken away the occasion of childish contentions, till they had both passed over the humour of such contentions. For Pyrocles bare reverence full of love to Musidorus, and Musidorus had a delight full of love in Pyrocles. Musidorus what he had learned either for body or mind would teach it to Pyrocles, and Pyrocles was so glad to learn of none as of Musidorus, till Pyrocles being come to 16 years of age, he seemed so to overrun his age in growth, strength, and all things following it, that not Musidorus, no, nor any man living, I think, could perform any action, either on horse or foot, more strongly, or deliver that strength more nimbly, or become the delivery more gracefully, or employ all more virtuously, which may well seem wonderful, but wonders are not wonders in a wonderful subject. At which time, understanding that the king Euarchus, after so many years' war, and the conquest of all Pannonia, and almost Thrace, had now brought the conclusion of all to the siege of Byzantium, to the raising of which siege great forces were made, they would needs fall to the practice of those virtues which they before learned. And therefore the mother of Musidorus, nobly yielding over her own affects to her children's good, for a mother she was in effect to them both, the rather that they might help her beloved brother, they brake off all delays, which Musidorus for his part thought already had devoured too much of his good time, but that he had once granted a boon, before he knew what it was, to his dear friend Pyrocles, that he would never seek the adventures of arms until he might go with him, which having fast bound his heart a true slave to faith, he had bid a tedious delay of following his own humour for his friend's sake, till now, being both sent for by Euarchus, and finding Pyrocles able every way to go through with that kind of life, he was as desirous for his sake as for his own to enter into it. So therefore, preparing a navy, that they might go like themselves, and not only bring the comfort of their presence, but of their power to their dear parent Euarchus, they recommended themselves to the sea, leaving the shore of Thessalia full of tears and vows, and were received thereon with so smooth and smiling a face as if Neptune had as then learned falsely to fawn on princes. The wind was like a servant, waiting behind them, so just that they might fill the sails as they listed, and the best sailors, showing themselves less covetous of his liberality, so tempered it that they all kept together like a beautiful flock, which so well could obey their master's pipe, without sometimes, to delight the prince's eyes, some 2 or 3 of them would strive who could, either by the cunning of well spending the wind's breath, or by the advantageous building of their moving houses, leave their fellows behind them in the honour of speed, while the 2 princes had leisure to see the practice of that which before they had learned by books, to consider the art of catching the wind prisoner to no other end but to run away with it, to see how beauty and use can so well agree together that, of all the trinkets wherewith they are attired, there is not one but serves to some necessary purpose. And, O Lord, to see the admirable power and noble effects of love, whereby the seeming insensible lodestone, with a secret beauty holding the spirit of iron in it, can draw that hard-hearted thing unto it, and, like a virtuous mistress, not only make it bow itself, but with it make it aspire to so high a love as of the heavenly poles, and thereby to bring forth the noblest deeds that the children of the earth can boast of. But by the next morning, even as the sun began to make a gilded show of good meaning, there arose before his face a dark veil of clouds, which blackened all the heavens, preparing a mournful stage for a tragedy to be played on. The traitorous sea began to swell in pride against the afflicted navy, and such a storm played his direful part as sundered all the vessels, driving the good ship of the two princes on a rock, which, hidden with those outrageous waves, did, as it were, closely dissemble his cruel mind. The ship broke herself in pieces, and, as it were, tore out her own bowels to feed the sea's greediness. The princes, alas, were sundered as the wreck, Musidorus driven out to sea on a piece of the ship, while, contrariwise, Pyrocles was shortly brought out of the sea's fury to the land's comfort. Being cast on land, much bruised and beaten both with the sea's hard farewell and the shore's rude welcome, and even almost deadly tired with the length of his uncomfortable labour, as he was walking up to discover somebody to whom he might go for relief, there came straight running unto him certain who, as it was after known, by appointment watched with many others in divers places along the coast, who laid hands on him, and without either questioning with him or showing will to hear him, like men fearful to appear curious, or, which was worse, having no regard to the hard plight he was in, being so wet and weak, they carried him some miles thence to a house of a principal officer of that country, who with no more civility, though with much more business, than those underfellows had showed, began in captious manner to put interrogatories unto him, to which he, unused to such entertainment, did shortly and plainly answer what he was and how he came thither. But that no sooner known, with numbers of armed men to guard him, for mischief, not from mischief, he was sent to the king's court, which, as then, was not above a day's journey off, with letters from that officer containing his own serviceable diligence in discovering so great a personage, adding withal more than was true of his conjectures, because he would endear his own service. This country whereon he fell was Phrygia, and it was to the king thereof to whom he was sent, a prince of a melancholy constitution both of body and mind, wickedly sad, ever musing of horrible matters, suspecting, or rather condemning, all men of evil, because his mind had no eye to espy goodness, and therefore, accusing sycophants of all men, did best sort to his nature. And this king, with a toad-like retiredness of mind, had suffered, and well remembered what he had suffered, from the war in Thessalia. But when this bloody king knew what he was, and in what order he and his cousin Musidorus so much of him feared, were come out of Thessalia, assuredly thinking, because ever thinking the worst, that those forces were provided against him, glad of the perishing, as he thought of Musidorus, determined in public sort to put Pyrocles to death. For having quite lost the way of nobleness, he strave to climb to the height of terribleness, and thinking to make all men adread to make such one an enemy who would not spare nor fear to kill so great a prince, and lastly, having nothing in him why to make him his friend, he thought he would take him away from being his enemy. The day was appointed, and all things prepared for that cruel blow, in so solemn an order as if they would set forth tyranny in most gorgeous decking. The princely youth of invincible valour, yet so unjustly subjected to such outrageous wrong, carrying himself in all his demeanours so constantly, abiding extremity, that one might see it was the cutting away of the greatest hope of the world, and destroying virtue in his sweetest growth. But so it fell out that his death was prevented by a rare example of friendship in Musidorus, who, being almost drowned, had been taken up by a fisherman belonging to the kingdom of Bithynia, and being there, and understanding the full discourse, as fame was very prodigal of so notable an accident, in what case Pyrocles was, learning withal that his hate was far more to him than to Pyrocles, he found means to acquaint himself with a nobleman of that country, to whom, largely discovering what he was, he found him a most fit instrument to effectuate his desire. For this nobleman had been one who in many years had served Euarchus, and had been so mind-stricken by the beauty of virtue in that noble king, that, though not born his subject, he ever professed himself his servant. His desire, therefore, to him was to keep Musidorus in a strong castle of his, and then to make the king of Phrygia understand that, if he would deliver Pyrocles, Musidorus would willingly put himself into his hands, knowing well that how thirsty soever he was of Pyrocles' blood, he would rather drink that of Musidorus. The nobleman was loath to preserve one by the loss of another, but time urging resolution, the importunity of Musidorus, who showed a mind not to overlive Pyrocles, with the affection he bare to Euarchus, so prevailed that he carried this strange offer of Musidorus, which by the tyrant was greedily accepted. And so, upon security of both sides, they were interchanged, where I may not omit the work of friendship in Pyrocles, who, both in speech and countenance to Musidorus, well showed that he thought himself injured and not relieved by him, asking him what he had ever seen in him why he could not bear the extremities of mortal accidents as well as any man, and why he should envy him the glory of suffering death for his friend's cause, and as it were rob him of his own possession. But in this notable contention, where the conquest must be the conqueror's destruction, and safety the punishment of the conquered, Musidorus prevailed, because he was a more welcome prey to the unjust king, and as cheerfully going towards as Pyrocles went frowardly fromward his death, he was delivered to the king, who could not be enough sure of him without he fed his own eyes upon one whom he had begun to fear as soon as the other began to be. Yet because he would in one act both make ostentation of his own felicity, into whose hands his most feared enemy was fallen, and withal cut off such hopes from his suspected subjects, when they should know certainly he was dead, with much more skilful cruelty and horrible solemnity he causeth each thing to be prepared for his triumph of tyranny. And so, the day being come, he was led forth by many armed men, who often had been the fortifiers of wickedness, to the place of execution, where, coming with a mind comforted in that he had done such service to Pyrocles, this strange encounter he had. The excelling Pyrocles was no sooner delivered by the king's servants to a place of liberty than he bent his wit and courage, and what would not they bring to pass, how either to deliver Musidorus or to perish with him, and finding he could get in that country no forces sufficient by force to rescue him, to bring himself to die with him, little hoping of better event, he put himself in poor raiment, and by the help of some few crowns he took of that nobleman, who full of sorrow, though not knowing the secret of his intent, suffered him to go in such order from him, he, even he, born to the greatest expectation, and of the greatest blood that any prince might be, submitted himself to be servant to the executioner that should put to death Musidorus, a far notabler proof of his friendship, considering the height of his mind, than any death could be. That bad officer, not suspecting him, being arrayed fit for such an estate, and having his beauty hidden by many foul spots he artificially put upon his face, gave him leave not only to wear a sword himself, but to bear his sword prepared for the justified murder. And so Pyrocles, taking his time when Musidorus was upon the scaffold, separated somewhat from the rest, as allowed to say something, he stepped unto him, and putting the sword into his hand not bound, a point of civility the officers used towards him, because they doubted no such enterprise, "Musidorus," said he, "die nobly. In truth, never man between joy before knowledge what to be glad of, and fear after considering his case, had such a confusion of thoughts as I had when I saw Pyrocles so near me." But with that Dorus blushed, and Pamela smiling, Dorus the more blushed at her smiling, and she the more smiled at his blushing, because he had, with the remembrance of that plight he was in, forgotten, in speaking of himself, to use the third person. But Musidorus turned her thoughts at this day of his story in rough sort, being with sword in hand, by laying heartily about him. And Pyrocles, the excellent Pyrocles, did such wonders as had made Musidorus full of courage, had he been born a coward. But as they were still fighting, with weak arms and strong hearts, it happened that one of the soldiers, commanded to go up after his fellows against the princes, having received a light hurt, more wounded in his heart, went back with as much diligence as he came up with modesty, which another of his fellows seeing, to pick a thank of the king, strake him upon the face, reviling him, that so accompanied he would run away from so few. But he, as many times it falls out, only valiant when he was angry, in revenge thrust him through, which with his death was straight revenged by a brother of his, and that again requited by a fellow of the others. There began to be a great tumult amongst the soldiers, which seen and not understood by the people, used to fears, but not used to be bold in them, some began to cry treason, and that voice straight multiplying itself, the king, oh, the cowardice of a guilty conscience, before any man set upon him, fled away. Wherewith the brute, either by art of some well-meaning men, or by some chance, as such things often fall out by, ran from one to the other, that the king was slain. Wherewith certain young men of the bravest minds cried with a loud voice, "Liberty!" and encouraging the other citizens to follow them, set upon the guard and soldiers, as chief instruments of tyranny, and quickly aided by the princes, they had left none of them alive, nor any other in the city who they thought had in any sort set his hand to the work of their servitude, and God knows, by the blindness of rage, killing many guiltless persons, either for affinity to the tyrant or enmity to the tyrant-killers. But some of the wiser, seeing that a popular license is indeed the many-headed tyranny, prevail with the rest to make Musidorus their chief, choosing one of them, because princes, to defend them, and him because elder and most hated of the tyrant, and by him to be ruled, whom forthwith they lifted up. Fortune, I think, smiling at her work therein, that a scaffold of execution should grow to a scaffold of coronation. But by and by came news that the tyrant was not dead, but had fled to a strong place, and was gathering his forces with all speed. But those collected were dispersed as soon, and the king killed in the fight by the two princes. Thereon the chief rule and kingship was offered to Musidorus, but he, thinking it a greater greatness to give a kingdom than to get a kingdom, bestowed it on one who was left of the blood royal, an aged gentleman of approved goodness. And soon by this king and his people the kingdom next joining was added to his, and the country well cleared of monsters and cruel giants of hugeness and greatness, and therefore well called giants, who did trouble it. End of Book 2, Part 2. Book 2, Part 3 of the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia by Philip Sidney, Book 2, Part 3. It were the part of a very idle orator to set forth the numbers of well-devised honours done unto them. But as high honour is not only gotten and borne by pain and danger, but must be nursed by the like, or else vanisheth as soon as it appears to the world, so the natural hunger thereof, which was in Pyrocles, suffered him not to account a resting seat of that which either riseth or falleth, but still to make one occasion beget another, whereby his doings might send his praise to others' mouths, to rebound again true contentment to his spirit. And therefore, having well established those kingdoms under good governors, and rid them by their valour of such giants and monsters as before time armies were not able to subdue, they determined in unknown order to see more of the world, and to employ those gifts esteemed rare in them to the good of mankind. And therefore, with themselves, understanding that the king Euarchus was past all the cumber of his wars, go privately to seek exercises of their virtue, thinking it not so worthy to be brought to heroical effects by fortune or necessity, like Ulysses and Aeneas, as by one's own choice and working. And so went they away from very unwilling people to leave them, making time haste itself to be a circumstance of their honour, and one place witness to another of the truth of their doings. For scarcely were they out of the confines of Pontus, but that, as they rid alone armed, for alone they went, one serving the other, they met an adventure which, though not so notable for any great effect they performed, yet worthy to be remembered for the unused examples therein, as well of true natural goodness as of wretched ungratefulness. And now, being in the country of Galatia, and in midwinter, the princes were condemned by the pride of the wind which blew into their faces to some shrouding place, a hollow rock, and under that rude canopy they found an aged man, and a young scarcely come to the age of man, the old man blind, the young man leading him, and their doleful speeches were such as moved the princes to ask the younger who they were. Sirs, answered he, with a good grace, your presence promiseth that cruelty shall not overrun hate, and if it did, in truth our state is sunk below the degree of fear. This old man whom I lead was lately rightful prince of this country of Paphlagonia, by the hard-hearted ungratefulness of a son of his, deprived not only of his kingdom, whereof no foreign forces were ever able to spoil him, but of his sight, the riches which nature grants to the poorest creatures, whereby, and by other his unnatural dealings, he hath been driven to such grief, as even now he would have had me to have led him to the top of this rock, thence to cast himself headlong to death, and so would have made me, who received my life of him, to be the worker of his destruction. But, noble gentlemen, said he, if either of you have a father, and feel what dutiful affection is engrafted in a son's heart, let me entreat you to convey this afflicted prince to some place of rest and security. Amongst your worthy acts it shall be none of the least that a king of such might and fame, and so unjustly oppressed, is in any sort by you relieved. But before they could make him answer, his father began to speak. Ah, my son, said he, how evil an historian are you, that leave out the chief knot of all the discourse. My wickedness, my wickedness! And if thou doest it to spare my ears, the only sense now left me proper for knowledge, assure thyself thou dost mistake me, and I take witness of that sun which you see. With that he cast up his blind eyes, as if he would hunt for light, and wish myself in worse case than I do wish myself, which is as evil as may be, if I speak untruly, that nothing is so welcome to my thoughts as the publishing of my shame. Therefore know you, gentlemen, to whom from my heart I wish that it may not prove some ominous foretoken of misfortune to have met with such a miser as I am, that whatsoever my son, O God, that truth binds me to reproach him with the name of my son, hath said is true. But besides those truths, this also is true, that having had in lawful marriage of a mother fit to bear royal children, this son, such a one as partly you see, and better shall know by my short declaration, and so enjoyed the expectations in the world of him, till he was grown to justify their expectations, so as I needed envy no farther for the chief comfort of mortality, to leave another oneself after me, I was carried by a bastard son of mine, if at least I be bound to believe the words of that base woman my concubine, his mother, first to mislike, then to hate, lastly to destroy, or to do my best to destroy, this son, I think you think, undeserving destruction. What way she used to bring me to it, if I should tell you, I should tediously trouble you with as much poisonous hypocrisy, desperate fraud, smooth malice, hidden ambition, and smiling envy, as in any living person could be harboured. But I list it not. No remembrance of naughtiness delights me but mine own. And methinks the accusing his traps might in some manner excuse my fault, which certainly I loathe to do. But the conclusion is, that I gave order to some servants of mine, whom I thought as apt for such charities as myself, to lead him out into a forest, and there to kill him. But those thieves, better natured to my son than myself, spared his life, letting him go to learn to live poorly, which he did, giving himself to be a private soldier in a country hereby. But as he was ready to be greatly advanced for some noble pieces of service which he did, he heard news of me, who, drunk in my affection to that unlawful and unnatural son of mine, suffered myself so to be governed by him, that all favours and punishments passed by him, all offices and places of importance distributed to his favourites, so that, ere I was aware, I had left myself nothing but the name of a king, which he, shortly weary of too, with many indignities, if anything may be called an indignity which was laid upon me, threw me out of my see, and put out my eyes, and then, proud in his tyranny, let me go, neither imprisoning nor killing me, but rather delighting to make me feel misery, misery indeed, if ever there were any, full of wretchedness, fuller of disgrace, and fullest of guiltiness. And as he came to the crown by so unjust means, as unjustly he kept it, by force of stranger soldiers and citadels, the nests of tyranny and murtherers of liberty, disarming all his own countrymen, that no man durst show himself a well-willer of mine. To say the truth, I think few of them being so, considering my cruel folly to my good son, and foolish kindness to my unkind bastard. But if there were any who felt pity of so great a fall, and had yet any sparks of unslain duty left in them towards me, yet durst they not show it, scarcely with giving me alms at their doors, which yet was the only sustenance of my distressed life, nobody daring to show so much charity as to lend me a hand to guide my dark steps. Till this son of mine, God knows, worthy of a more virtuous and more fortunate father, forgetting my abominable wrongs, not reckoning danger, and neglecting the present good way he was doing himself good, came hither to do this kind office you see him perform towards me, to my unspeakable grief, not only because his kindness is a glass even to my blind eyes of my naughtiness, but that, above all griefs, it grieves me he should desperately adventure the loss of his well-deserving life for mine, that yet owe more to fortune for my deserts, as if he would carry mud in a chest of crystal. For well I know, he that now reigneth, how much soever, and with good reason, he despiseth me, of all men despised, yet he will not let slip any advantage to make away him whose just title, and noble by courage and goodness, may one day shake the seat of a never secure tyranny. And for this cause I craved of him to lead me to the top of this rock, indeed, I must confess, with meaning to free him from so serpentine a companion as I am. But he, finding what I purposed, only therein since he was born, showed himself disobedient unto me. And now, gentlemen, you have the true story, which I pray you publish to the world, that my mischievous proceedings may be the glory of his filial piety, the only reward now left for so great a merit. And if it may be, let me obtain that of you which my son denies me, for never was there more pity in saving any than in ending me, both because therein my agony shall end, and so you shall preserve this excellent young man, who else wilfully follows his own ruin. The matter, in itself lamentable, lamentably expressed by the old prince, which needed not to take to himself the gestures of pity, since his face could not put off the marks thereof, greatly moved the two princes to compassion, which could not stay in such hearts as theirs without seeking remedy. But by and by Plexirtus, so was the bastard called, came thither with 40 horse, of purpose to murder his brother. Yet notwithstanding help given to the usurper by Tydeus and Telenor, 2 brothers of the noblest house of that country, and 40 or 50 of their suite, Pyrocles and Musidorus and the king of Pontus, who had come unlooked for to their succour, so reduced the usurper that they left him but that strong place wherein he was, in which season too the blind king, his heart broken with affliction, having in the chief city of his realm placed the crown upon his son Leonatus' head, even in a moment, as it should seem, died. Plexirtus, reduced to famine, came, cunningly dissembling, barefooted and with a rope about his neck, to Leonatus, seeming to desire nothing but death, as, ashamed to live, he begged the life in refusing it. In the noble breast of Leonatus he begat not only pity, but pardon, and the ministers of his cruelty being punished, he was forgiven. In such sort the princes left these reconciled brothers, Plexirtus in all his behaviour carrying him in far lower degree of service than the ever noble nature of Leonatus would suffer him, and taking likewise their leaves of their good friend the king of Pontus, who returned to enjoy some benefit both of his wife and kingdom, they privately went thence, having only with them the 2 valiant brothers, who would needs accompany them through divers places, they 4 doing acts more dangerous, though less famous, because they were but private chivalries, till hearing of the fair and virtuous queen Erona of Lycia, besieged by the puissant king of Armenia, they bent themselves to her succour, both because the weaker, and weaker as being a lady, and partly because they heard the king of Armenia had in his company 3 of the most famous men living for matters of arms that were known to be in the world, whereof one was the Prince Plangus, whose name was sweetened by your breath, peerless lady, when the last day pleased you to mention him unto me. The other 2 were 2 great princes, though holding of him, Barzanes and Euardes, men of giant-like both hugeness and force, in which 2 especially the trust the king had of victory was reposed. And of them those brothers Tydeus and Telenor, sufficient judges in warlike matters, spake so high commendations that the two princes had even a youthful longing to have some trial of their virtue. And therefore, as soon as they were entered into Lycia, they joined themselves with them that faithfully served the poor queen, at that time besieged, and ere long animated in such sort their almost overthrown hearts, that they went by force to relieve the town, though they were deprived of a great part of their strength by the parting of the two brothers, who were sent for in all haste to return to their old friend and master Plexirtus, who, willingly hoodwinking themselves from seeing his faults, and binding themselves to believe what he said, often abused the virtue of courage to defend his foul vice of injustice. But now they were sent for to advance the conquest he was about, while Pyrocles and Musidorus pursued the delivery of the queen Erona. I have heard, said Pamela, that part of the story of Plangus, when he passed through this country. Therefore you may, if you list, pass over that war of Erona's quarrel, lest, if you speak too much of war matters, you should wake Mopsa, which might haply breed a great broil. He looked and saw that Mopsa indeed sate swallowing of sleep with open mouth, making such a noise withal, as nobody could lay the stealing of a nap to her charge. Whereupon, willing to use that occasion, I kneeled down, and with humble heartedness and hearty earnestness printed in my graces. Alas, said I, divine lady, who have wrought such principles in me as to make a prince none of the basest, to think all principalities base, in respect of the sheep-hook which may hold him up in your sight, vouchsafe now, at last, to hear in direct words my humble suit, while this dragon sleeps that keeps the golden fruit. If in my desire I wish, or in my hopes aspire, or in my imagination feign to myself anything which may be the least spot to that heavenly virtue which shines in all your doings, I pray the eternal powers that the words I speak may be deadly poisons while they are in my mouth, and that all my hopes, all my desires, all my imaginations may only work their own confusion. But if love of you, love of your virtues, seek only that favour of you which becometh that gratefulness which cannot misbecome your excellency, oh do not. He would have said further, but Pamela calling aloud, Mopsa, she suddenly start up, staggering and rubbing her eyes, ran first out of the door, and then back to them, before she knew how she went out or why she came in again, till at length, being fully come to her little self, she asked Pamela why she had called her. For nothing, said Pamela, but that you might hear some tales of your servants telling. And therefore now, said she, Doris, go on. But as I, who found no so good sacrifice as obedience, was returning to the story of myself, Philoclea came in, and by after her Miso, so as for that time they were fain to let Doris depart. Pamela and Philoclea, their sober dinner being come and gone, resolved to beg Zelmane's company, and to go, while the heat of the day lasted, to bathe themselves, as the Arcadian nymphs often do, in the river Ladon, which of all the rivers of Greece had the price for excellent pureness and sweetness, insomuch as the very bathing in it was accounted exceeding healthful. It ran upon so fine and delicate a ground, as one could not easily judge whether the river did more wash the gravel, or the gravel did purify the river not running forthright, but almost continually winding, as if the lower streams would return to their spring, or that the river had a delight to play with itself. The banks of either side, seeming arms of the loving earth that fain would embrace it, and the river a wanton nymph, which still would slip from it, either side of the bank being fringed with most beautiful trees, which resisted the sun's darts from overmuch piercing the natural coldness of the river. Zelmane, whose passion was so great that she was obliged to lean against a tree, as the raiments of these damsels fell off, to receive the kisses of the ground, retired, while Philoclea, who blushing and withal smiling, making shamefastness pleasant and pleasure shamefast, tenderly moved her feet, unwonted to feel the naked ground, till the touch of the cold water made a pretty kind of shrugging come over her body, like the twinkling of the fairest among the fixed stars. But the river itself gave way unto her, so that she was straight breast high, which was the deepest that thereabout she could be. And when cold Ladon had once fully embraced them, himself was no more so cold to those ladies, but, as if his cold complexion had been heated with love, so seemed he to play about every part he could touch. Zelmane, in retirement taking up her lute, with her panting heart dancing to the music, gave utterance and invention to a song in honour of her mistress, when, coming to the latter end of it, she saw a water-spaniel come and fetch away one of Philoclea's gloves, whose fine proportion showed well what a dainty guest was wont there to be lodged. It was a delight to Zelmane to see that the dog was therewith delighted, and so let him go a little way withal, who quickly carried it out of sight among certain trees and bushes, which were very close together. But by and by he came again, and amongst the raiment the dog lighted upon a little book of 4 or 5 leaves of paper, and was bearing that away too. But when Zelmane, not knowing what importance it might be of, ran after the dog, who going straight to those bushes, she might see the dog deliver it to a gentleman who secretly lay there. But she hastily coming in, the gentleman rose up, and with a courteous, though sad countenance, presented himself unto her. Zelmane's eyes straight willed her mind to mark him, for she thought in herself she had never seen a man of a more goodly presence, in whom strong making took not away delicacy, nor beauty fierceness, being indeed such a right manlike man as nature, often erring, yet shows she would fain make. But when she had a while not without admiration viewed him, she desired him to deliver back the glove and paper, because they were the Lady Philoclea's, telling him withal that she would not willingly let them know of his close lying in that prohibited place while they were bathing of themselves, because she knew they would be mortally offended withal. Fair lady, answered he, the worst of the complaint is already past, since I feel of my fault in myself the punishment. But for these things I assure you it was my dog's wanton boldness, not my presumption. With that he gave her back the paper. But for the glove, said he, since it is my Lady Philoclea's, give me leave to keep it, sith my heart cannot persuade itself to part from it. And I pray you tell the lady, lady indeed of all my desires, that I will direct my life to honour this glove with serving her. O villain, cried out Zelmane, madded with finding an unlooked for rival, and that he would make her a messenger, dispatch and deliver it, or by the life of her that owes it, I will make thy soul, though too base a price, pay for it. And with that drew out her sword, which Amazon-like she ever wear about her. The gentleman retired himself into an open place from among the bushes, and then drawing out his too, he offered to deliver it unto her, saying withal, God forbid I should use my sword against you, sith, if I be not deceived, you are the same famous Amazon that both defended my lady's just title of beauty against the valiant Phalantus, and saved her life in killing the lion. Therefore I am rather to kiss your hands, with acknowledging myself bound to obey you. But this courtesy was worse than a bastinado to Zelmane, so that again, with rageful eyes, she bade him defend himself, for no less than his life should answer it. A hard case, said he, to teach my sword that lesson, which hath ever used to turn itself to a shield in a lady's presence. But Zelmane, hearkening to no more words, began with such witty fury to pursue him with blows and thrusts, that nature and virtue commanded the gentleman to look to his safety. Yet still courtesy, that seemed incorporate in his heart, would not be persuaded by danger to offer any offence, but only to stand upon the best defensive guard he could, sometimes going back, being content in that respect to take on the figure of cowardice, sometime with strong and well-met wards, sometimes cunning avoidings of his body, and sometimes feigning some blows, which himself pulled back before they needed to be withstood. And so with play did he a good while fight against the fight of Zelmane, who more spited with that courtesy, that one that did nothing should be able to resist her, burned away with choler and emotions which might grow out of her own sweet disposition, determining to kill him if he fought no better, and so, redoubling her blows, drave the stranger to no other shift than to ward and go back, at that time seeming the image of innocency against violence. But at length he found that, both in public and private respects, who stands only upon defence stands upon no defence, for Zelmane seeming to strike at his head, and he going toward it, withal stepped back, as he was accustomed. She stopped her blow in the air, and suddenly turning the point, ran full at his breast, so as he was driven with the pommel of his sword, having no other weapon of defence, to beat it down. But the thrust was so strong that he could not so wholly beat it away, but that it met with his thigh, through which it ran. But Zelmane, retiring her sword, and seeing his blood, victorious anger was conquered by the before conquered pity, and heartily sorry, and even ashamed with herself, she was considering how little he had done who well she found could have done more, insomuch that she said, Truly I am sorry for your hurt, but yourself gave the cause, both in refusing to deliver the glove, and yet not fighting as I know you could have done. But, said she, because I perceive you disdain to fight with a woman, it may be, before a year come about, you shall meet with a near kinsman of mine, Pyrocles, Prince of Macedon, and I give you my word he for me shall maintain this quarrel against you. I would, answered Amphialus, I had many more such hurts to meet and know that worthy prince, whose virtue I love and admire, though my good destiny hath not been to see his person. But as they were so speaking, the young ladies came, to whom Mopsa, curious in anything but her own good behaviour, having followed and seen Zelmane fighting, had cried what she had seen. But they, careful of Zelmane, Pamela with a noble mind, and Philoclea with a loving, made quick work to come to save her. But already they found them in talk, and Zelmane careful of his wound. And when they saw him, they knew it was their cousin german, the famous Amphialus, whom, yet with a sweet grace bitterness, they blamed for breaking their father's commandment, especially while themselves were in such sort retired. But he craved pardon, protesting unto them that he had only been to seek solitary places, by an extreme melancholy that had a good while possessed him, and guided to that place by his spaniel, where, while the dog hunted in the river, he had withdrawn himself to pacify with sleep his overwatch eyes, till a dream waked him. But Philoclea, that was even jealous of herself for Zelmane, would needs have her glove, and not without so mighty a lour as that face could yield. As for Zelmane, when she knew it was Amphialus, Lord Amphialus, said she, I have long desired to know you heretofore, I must confess, with more good will, but still with honouring your virtue, though I love not your person. And at this time, I pray you, let us take care of your wound, upon condition you shall hereafter promise that a more knightly combat shall be performed between us. Amphialus answered in honourable sort, but with such excusing himself that more and more accused his love to Philoclea, and provoked more hate in Zelmane. But Mopsa had already called certain shepherds not far off, who knew and well observed their limits, to come and help to carry away Amphialus, whose wound suffered him not without danger to strain it, And so he, leaving himself with them, departed from them, faster bleeding in his heart than at his wound. He being gone, the ladies, with merry anger, talking in what naked simplicity their cousin had seen them, returned to the lodgeward, yet thinking it too early, as long as they had any day, to break off so pleasing a company with going to perform a cumbersome obedience. Zelmane invited them to the little arbour, only reserved for her, which they willingly did. And there sitting, Pamela having a while made the lute, in his language, show how glad it was to be touched by her fingers, Zelmane delivered up the paper which Amphialus had at first yielded unto her, and seeing written upon the back side of it the complaint of clangers, remembering what Dorus had told her, and desiring to know how much Philoclea knew of her estate, she took occasion in presenting of it to ask whether it were any secret or no. No, truly, answered Philoclea, 'tis even an exercise of my father's writing, a story of a gentleman whom he met as he lay under a tree, while his servants gat fresh post-horses for him. His pitiful motions and even groans moved my father to talk to him, and he afterwards set down his story in such a form as you see. The quick eyes of Zelmane, leave being given them to overrun the paper, perceived it to be a kind of tuneful dialogue between a certain Plangus and Basilius, relating the love torments of Plangus and a fair queen named Erona in this sad world, where death is feared and life is held with pain, like players placed to fill a filthy stage, where change of thoughts one fool to other shows, and all but jest, save only sorrow's rage, where the body is indeed but a shop of shame, a book where blots be rife. Little else learned she from it, and therefore thus she spake to Philoclea: Most excellent lady, one may be little wiser for this dialogue, since it neither sets forth what Plangus nor what Erona is, wherefore I would humbly crave to understand the particular discourse thereof. With my sister's leave and help, answered Philoclea, I will at once declare it. Of late there reigned a king in Lydia, who had for the blessing of his marriage this only daughter of his, Erona, a princess worthy for her beauty, as much praise as beauty may be praiseworthy. This Princess Erona, being 19 years of age, seeing the country of Lydia so much devoted to Cupid, as that in every place his naked pictures and images were superstitiously adored, either moved thereunto by the esteeming that it could be no godhead which could breed wickedness, or the shamefast consideration of such nakedness, procured so much of her father as utterly to pull down and deface all those statues and pictures, which how terribly he punished, for to that the Lydians impute it, quickly after appeared. For she had not lived a year longer when she was stricken with most obstinate love to a young man, but of mean parentage, in her father's court, named Antiphilus, so mean as that he was but the son of her nurse, and by that means, without other desert, became known of her. Now so evil could she conceal her fire, and so wilfully persevered she in it, that her father offering her the marriage of the great Tiridates, king of Armenia, who desired her more than the joys of heaven, she, for Antiphilus' sake, refused it. Many ways her father sought to withdraw her from it, sometimes by persuasion, sometimes by threatenings, once hiding Antiphilus, and giving her to understand that he was fled the country, lastly making a solemn execution to be done of another, under the name of Antiphilus, whom he kept in prison. But neither she liked persuasions, nor feared threatenings, nor change for absence, and when she thought him dead she sought all means, as well by poison as knife, to send her soul at least to be married in the eternal church with him. This so brake the tender father's heart that, leaving things as he found them, he shortly after died. Then forthwith Erona, being seized of the crown, and arming her will with authority, sought to advance her affection to the holy title of matrimony. But before she could accomplish all the solemnities, she was overtaken with a war the king Tiridates made upon her, only for her person, towards whom, for her ruin, love had kindled his cruel heart, indeed cruel and tyrannous, for being far too strong in the field, he spared no man, woman, nor child, but, as though there could be found no foil to set forth the extremity of his love, but extremity of hatred, wrote as it were the sonnets of his love in the blood, and tuned them in the cries of her subjects, although his fair sister Artaxia, who would accompany him in the army, sought all means to appease his fury, till lastly he besieged Erona in her best city, vowing to win her or lose his life. And now had he brought her to the point either of a woeful consent or a ruinous denial, when there came thither, following the course which virtue and fortune led them, 2 excellent young princes, Pyrocles and Musidorus, the one prince of Macedon, the other of Thessalia, 2 princesses Plangus said, and he witnessed his saying with sighs and tears, the most accomplished both in body and mind that the sun ever looked upon. While Philoclea spake those words, O sweet words, thought Zelmane to herself, which are not only a praise to me, but a praise to praise itself, which out of that mouth issueth. These 2 princes, said Philoclea, as well to help the weaker, especially being a lady, as to save a Greek people from being ruined by such whom we call and count barbarous, gathering together such of the honestest Lydians as would venture their lives to succour their princess, giving order by a secret message, they sent into the city that they should issue with all force at an appointed time. They set upon Tiridates' camp with so well guided a fierceness that, being of both sides assaulted, he was like to be overthrown. but that this Plangus, being general of Tiridates' horsemen, especially aided by the two mighty men Euardes and Barzanes, rescued the footmen, even almost defeated, but yet could not bar the princes, with their succours both of men and victual, to enter the city. Which when Tiridates found would make the war long, which length seemed to him worse than a languishing consumption, he made a challenge of 3 princes in his retinue against those 2 princes and Antiphilus, and that thereupon the quarrel should be decided, with compact that neither side should help his fellow, but of whose side the more overcame, with him the victory should remain. Antiphilus, though Erona chose rather to bide the brunt of war than venture him, yet could not for shame refuse the offer, especially since the 2 strangers that had no interest in it did willingly accept it. Besides that, she saw it like enough that the people, weary of the miseries of war, would rather give him up, if they saw him shrink, than for his sake venture their ruin, considering that the challengers were of far greater worthiness than himself. So it was agreed upon, and against Pyrocles was Euardes, king of Bithynia, Barzanes of Hyrcania against Musidorus, 2 men that thought the world scarce able to resist them, and against Antiphilus he placed this same Plangus, being his own cousin german, and son to the king of Iberia. Now so it fell out that Musidorus slew Barzanes and Pyrocles Euardes, which victory those princes esteemed above all that ever they had. But of the other side Plangus took Antiphilus prisoner, under which colour, as if the matter had been equal, though indeed it was not, the greater part being overcome of his side, Tiridates continued his war, and to bring Erona to a compelled yielding, sent her word that he would the 3rd morrow after, before the walls of the town, strike off Antiphilus' head, without his suit in that space were granted, adding withal, because he had heard of her desperate affection, that if in the meantime she did herself any hurt, what tortures could be devised should be laid upon Antiphilus. Then lo, if Cupid be a god, or that the tyranny of our own thoughts seem as a god unto us, but whatsoever it was, then it did set forth the miserableness of his effects, she being drawn to 2 contraries by one cause, for the love of him commanded her to yield to no other, the love of him commanded her to preserve his life, which not might well be cut, but united it could not be. So that love in her passions, like a right make-bait, whispered to both sides arguments of quarrel. At length, even the evening before the day appointed for his death, the determination of yielding prevailed, especially growing upon a message of Antiphilus, who, with all the conjuring terms he could devise, besought her to save his life upon any conditions. But she had no sooner sent her messenger to Tiridates, but her mind changed, and she went to the 2 young princes, Pyrocles and Musidorus, and falling down at their feet, desired them to try some way for her deliverance, showing herself resolved not to overlive Antiphilus, nor yield to Tiridates. They, that knew not what she had done in private, prepared that night accordingly, and as sometimes it falls out that what is inconstancy seems cunning, so did this change indeed stand in as good stead as a witty dissimulation, for it made the king as reckless as them diligent, so that, in the dead time of the night, the princess issued out of the town, with whom she would needs go, either to die herself or rescue Antiphilus, having no armour or weapon but affection. And I cannot tell you how, by what device, though Plangus at large described it, the conclusion was. The wonderful valour of the 2 princes so prevailed that Antiphilus was succoured and the king slain. Plangus was then the chief man left in the camp, and therefore, seeing no other remedy, conveyed in safety into her country Artaxia, now queen of Armenia, who, being at home, proclaimed great rewards to any private man, and herself in marriage to any prince that would destroy Pyrocles and Musidorus. But thus was Antiphilus redeemed, and though against the consent of all her nobility, married to Erona, in which case the 2 Greek princes, being called away by another adventure, left them. But now, methinks, as I have read some poets who, when they intend to tell some horrible matter, they bid men shun the hearing of it, so if I do not desire you to stop your ears from me, yet may I well desire a breathing time before I am to tell the execrable treason of Antiphilus, that brought her to great misery, and withal wish you all that from all mankind indeed you stop your ears. O most happy were we if we did set our loves one upon another. And as she spake that word, her cheeks in red letters writ more than her tongue did speak. And therefore, since I have named Plangus, I pray you, sister, said she, help me with the rest, for I have held the stage long enough, and if it please you to make his fortune known, as I have done Erona's, I will after take heart again to go on with his falsehood, and so, between us both, my lady Zelmane shall understand both the cause and parties of this lamentation. End of Book 2, Part 3. Book 2, Part 4 of the Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia. This is the LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicole Lee. The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia by Philip Sidney. Book 2, Part 4. Nay, beshrew me, said Miso, I will have none of that. I will first have my tale. You all and my daughter Mopsa may draw cuts, and the shortest cut speak first. For I tell you, and this may be suffered, when you are married, you will have first and last word of your husbands. The ladies laughed to see with what an eager earnestness she looked, having threatening, not only in her ferret eyes, but while she spake, her nose seeming to threaten her chin, and her shaking limbs one to threaten another. But there was no remedy, they must obey. And Miso, sitting on the ground with her knees up, and her hands upon her knees, tuning her voice with many a quavering cough, thus discoursed unto them. I tell you true, said she, whatsoever you think of me, you will one day be as I am. And I, simple though I sit here, thought once my penny as good silver as some of you do, and if my father had not played the hasty fool, it is no lie I tell you, I might have had another Gaines husband than Dametas. But let that pass, God amend him, and yet I speak it not without good cause. You are full in your tittle-tattlings of Cupid. Here is Cupid, and there is Cupid. I will tell you now what a good old woman told me, what an old wise man told her, what a great learned clerk told him, and gave it him in writing, and here I have in my prayer book. I pray you, said Philoclea, let us see it and read it. No haste but good, said Miso. You shall first know how I came by it. I was a young girl of 27-year-old, and I could not go through the street of our village, but I might hear the young men talk. Oh, the pretty little eyes of Miso! Oh, the fine thin lips of Miso! Oh, the goodly fat hands of Miso! Besides how well a certain wrying I had of my neck became me. Then the one would wink with one eye, and the other cast daisies at me. I must confess, seeing so many amorous, it made me set up my peacock's tail with the highest, which when this good old woman perceived, oh, the good old woman, well may the bones rest of the good old woman, she called me to her into her house. I remember full well it stood in the lane as you go to the barber's shop. All the town knew her. There was a great loss of her. She called me to her, and taking first a sop of wine to comfort her heart, it was of the same wine that comes out of Candia, which we pay so dear for nowadays, and in that good world was very good cheap, she called me to her. Minion, said she, indeed I was a pretty one in those days, though I say it. I see a number of lads that love you. Well, said she, I say no more. Do you know what love is? With that she brought me into a corner, where there was painted a foul fiend, I trow, for he had a pair of horns like a bull, his feet cloven, as many eyes upon his body as my grey mare hath dapples, and for all the world so placed. This monster sate like a hangman upon a pair of gallows. In his right hand he was painted holding a crown of laurel, in his left hand a purse of money, and out of his mouth hung a lace of two fair pictures of a man and a woman, and such a countenance he showed as if he would persuade folks by those allurements to come thither and be hanged. I, like a tender-hearted wench, skriked out for fear of the devil. Well, said she, this same is even love. Therefore do what thou list with all those fellows, one after another, and it recks not much what they do to thee, so it be in secret. But upon my charge, never love none of them. Then Miso, making a face to weep, as if it were sorrow for the remembrance of her youth, sent forth her tears like rain falling on dirty furrows, while the ladies read from her book a description of Cupid, which Zelmane took to be blasphemy against that god, and humbly besought Pamela to go on with the story. Pamela persisted to have fortune their judge, and blind fortune, that saw not the colour of them, gave Mopsa the preeminence. Wiping her mouth, for which there was good cause, she thus tumbled into her matter. In time past, said she, there was a king, the mightiest man in all his country, that had by his wife the fairest daughter that did ever eat pap. Now this king did keep a great house, that everybody might come and take their meat freely. So one day, as his daughter was sitting in her window, playing upon a harp, as sweet as any rose, and combing her head with a comb all of precious stones, there came in a knight into the court, upon a goodly horse, one hair of gold, and the other of silver. And so the knight, casting up his eyes to the window, did fall into such love with her that he grew not worth the bread he eat, till many a sorry day, going over his head, with daily diligence and grisly groans, he won her affection, so that they agreed to run away together. And so in May, when all true hearts rejoice, they stale out of the castle, without staying so much as for their breakfast. Now, forsooth, as they went together, often all to kissing one another, the knight told her he was brought up among the water nymphs, who had so bewitched him that, if he were ever asked his name, he must presently vanish away, and therefore charged her upon his blessing never to ask him what he was, nor whither he would. And so a great while she kept his commandment, till once, passing through a cruel wilderness as dark as pitch, her mouth so watered that she could not choose but ask him the question, and then he, making the grievousest complaints that would have melted a tree to have heard them, vanished quite away, and she lay down, casting forth such pitiful cries as any shriek owl. But having lain so, wet by the rain, and burnt by the sun, 5 days and 5 nights, she gat up, and went over many a high hill, and many a deep river, till she came to an aunt's house of hers, and came and cried to her for help. And she for pity gave her a nut, and bade her never open her nut till she was come to the extremest misery that ever tongue could speak of. And so she went, and never rested the evening where she went in the morning, till she came to a second aunt, and she gave her another nut. Keep this tale till my marriage day, good Mopsa, said the sweet Philoclea, and I will give thee the best gown that I wear that day. Mopsa was glad of the bargain, and Pamela related at some length the misfortunes of Prince Plangus, the base intrigues of his stepmother, the second wife of his father, the King of Iberia, who loved, and in a guilty way, the prince himself, and forced by this love, and the plots by which the queen sought to entrap him, and render him guilty in his father's eyes, who, urged by his wife, attended but some fit occasion to lay hands on his son, he, Plangus, chose a voluntary exile, and went to Tiridates, living in his court 11 or 12 years, at the end of which time the war of Verona happened. His father had suspicion so deeply engraved on his heart that he caused the son of the second wife, called Palladius, to be proclaimed successor, and Plangus quite excluded, so that Plangus was driven to continue serving Tiridates, when Erona, by the treason of Antiphilus. But at that word she stopped, for Basilius, not able longer to abide their absence, came suddenly among them, and with smiling countenance, telling Zelmane he was afraid she had stolen away his daughters, invited them to follow the son's counsel in going then to their lodging, for indeed the sun was ready to set. They yielded, Zelmane meaning some other time to understand the story of Antiphilus' treason and Erona's danger, whose cause she greatly tended. Now Miso had no sooner espied Basilius, but as spitefully as her rough voice could utter it, she set forth the sauciness of Amphialus. But Basilius only attended what Zelmane's opinion was, who, though she hated Amphialus, yet the nobility of her courage prevailed over it, and she desired he might be pardoned that youthful error, considering the reputation he had to be one of the best knights in the world, so as hereafter he governed himself as one remembering his fault. Basilius, giving the infinite terms of praises to Zelmane's both valour in conquering and pitifulness in pardoning, commanded no more words to be made of it, since such he thought was her pleasure. So brought he them up to visit his wife, where between her and him the poor Zelmane received a tedious entertainment, oppressed with being loved almost as much as with loving. But the night coming on with her silent steps upon them, they parted each from other, if at least they could be parted, of whom every one did live in another, and went about to flatter sleep in their beds, that disdained to bestow itself liberally upon such eyes, which by their will would ever be looking. On the next morn, Basilius, having combed and tricked himself more curiously than at any time 40 winters before, coming where Zelmane was, and loath to lose the precious fruit of time, he presented himself unto her, falling down upon both his knees and holding up his hands, as the old governess of Danae is painted, when she suddenly saw the golden shower. O heavenly woman, or earthly goddess, said he, let not my presence be odious unto you, nor my humble suit seem of small weight in your ears. Vouchsafe your eyes to descend upon this miserable old man, whose life hath hitherto been maintained but to serve as an increase of your beautiful triumphs. You only have overthrown me, and in my bondage consists my glory. Suffer not your own work to be despised of you, but look upon him with pity, whose life serves for your praise. Zelmane, keeping her countenance askance, she understood him not, told him it became her evil to suffer such excessive reverence of him, but that it worse became her to correct him to whom she owed duty, that the opinion she had of his wisdom was such as made her esteem greatly of his words, but that the words themselves sounded so she could not imagine what they might intend. Intend, said Basilius, proud that that was brought in question. What may they intend but a refreshing of my soul, and assuaging of my heat, and enjoying those your excellencies wherein my life is upheld, and my death threatened? Zelmane, lifting up her face, as if she had received a mortal injury of him, and is this the devotion your ceremonies have been bent to, said she? Is it the disdain of my estate, or the opinion of my lightness, that have emboldened such base fancies towards me? Enjoying, quoth you? Now little joy come to them that yield to such enjoying. Poor Basilius was so appalled that his legs bowed under him, his eyes looked as though he would gladly hide himself, and his old blood going to his heart, a general shaking all over his body possessed him. At length, with a wan mouth, he was about to give a stammering answer, when it came into Zelmane's head by this device to make her profit of his folly, and therefore, with a relented countenance, thus said unto him, Your words, mighty prince, were unfit either for me to hear or you to speak. But yet the large testimony I see of your affection makes me willing to suppress a great number of errors. Only thus much I think good to say, that the same words in my lady Philoclea's mouth, as from one woman to another, so as there were no other body by, might have had a better grace, and perchance have found a gentler receipt. Basilius, whose senses by desire were held open, scarce heard her answer out, but running to Philoclea, conjured her by the love she held to her father, with all the words desire could indite and authority utter, not to disdain any service to Zelmane. Philoclea, glad to enjoy the private conference of Zelmane, said she would in all virtuous sort lay his case before her, and going forth, after some time found Zelmane on a river's bank, who after a pause brought forth in this manner, Most beloved lady, the incomparable excellencies of yourself, weighted on by the greatness of your estate, and the importance of the thing, whereon my life consisteth, doth require both many ceremonies before the beginning, and many circumstances in the uttering my speech, both bold and fearful. But the small opportunity of envious occasion, by the malicious eye hateful love doth cast upon me, and the extreme bent of my affection, which will either break out in words or break my heart, compel me not only to embrace the smallest time, but to pass by the respect due unto you, in respect of your poor caitiff's life, who is now or never to be preserved. I do therefore vow unto you hereafter never more to omit all dutiful form. Do you only now vouchsafe to hear the matter of a mind most perplexed. If ever the sound of love hath come to your ears, or if ever you have understood what force it hath had to conquer the strongest hearts, and change the most settled estates, receive here an example of those strange tragedies, one that in himself containeth the particularities of all those misfortunes, and from henceforth believe that such a thing may be, since you shall see it is. You shall see, I say, a living image, and a present story of what love can do when he is bent to ruin. But alas! Whither goest thou, my tongue? Or how doth my heart consent to adventure the revealing his nearest touching secret? But peace, fear, thou comest too late, when already the harm is taken. Therefore I say again, O only princess, attend here a miserable miracle of affection. Behold here before your eyes Pyrocles, Prince of Macedon, whom you only have brought to this game of fortune and unused metamorphosis, whom you only have made neglect his country, forget his father, and lastly forsake to be Pyrocles, the same Pyrocles who, you heard, was betrayed by being put in a ship, which being burned, Pyrocles was drowned. O most true presage! For these traitors my eyes, putting me into a ship of desire which daily burneth, those eyes, I say, which betrayed me, will never leave till they have drowned me. But be not, most excellent lady, you that nature hath made to be the lodestar of comfort, be not the rock of shipwreck. You whom virtue hath made the princess of felicity, be not the minister of ruin. You whom my choice hath made the goddess of my safety, O let not from you be poured upon me destruction. Your fair face hath many tokens in it of amazement at my words. Think then what his amazement is from whence they come. Since no words can carry with them the life of the inward feeling, I desire that my desire may be weighed in the balances of honour, and let virtue hold them. For if the highest love in no base person may aspire to grace, then may I hope your beauty will not be without pity. If otherwise you be, alas, but let it not be so, resolved, yet shall not my death be comfortless, receiving it by your sentence. The joy which wrought into Pygmalion's mind while he found his beloved image was softer and warmer in his folded arms, till at length it accomplished his gladness with a perfect woman's shape, still beautified with the former perfections, was even such as by each degree of Zelmane's words creepingly entered into Philoclea, till her pleasure was fully made up with the manifesting of his being, which was such as in hope did overcome hope. Yet doubt would fain have played his part in her mind, and called in question how she should be assured that Zelmane was Pyrocles, but love straight stood up and deposed that a lie could not come from the mouth of Zelmane. Besides, a certain spark of honour, which rose in her well-disposed mind, made her fear to be alone with him, with whom alone she desired to be, with all the other contradictions growing in those minds, which neither absolutely climb the rock of virtue, nor freely sink into the sea of vanity. But that spark soon gave place, or at least gave no more light in her mind, than a candle doth in the sun's presence. But even sick with a surfeit of joy, and fearful of she knew not what, as he that newly finds huge treasures doubts whether he sleep or no, or like a fearful deer, which then looks most about when he comes to the best feed, with a shrugging kind of tremor through all her principal parts, she gave these affectionate words for answer. Alas! how painful a thing it is to a divided mind to make a well-joined answer! How hard it is to bring inward shame to outward confession! And what handsomeness, trow you, can be observed in that speech which is made one knows not to whom? Shall I say, O Zelmane? Alas, your words be against it. Shall I say, Prince Pyrocles? Wretch that I am, your show is manifest against it. But this I may well say, if I had continued as I ought, Philoclea, you had either never been, or ever been, Zelmane. You had either never attempted this change, set on with hope, or never discovered it, stopped with despair. But I fear me my behaviour, ill-governed, gave you the first comfort. I fear me my affection, ill-hid, hath given you this last assurance. I fear, indeed, the weakness of my government before made you think such a mask would be grateful unto me, and my weaker government since makes you to pull off the visor. What should I do then? Shall I seek far-fetched inventions? Shall I labour to lay marble colours over my ruinous thoughts? Or rather, though the pureness of my virgin mind be stained, let me keep the true simplicity of my word. True it is, alas, too true it is, Zelmane, for so I love to call thee, since in that name my love first began, and in the shade of that name my love shall best lie hidden, that even while so thou wert, what I bewitch me I know not, my passions were fitter to desire than to be desired. Shall I say then I am sorry, or that my love must be turned to hate,
since thou art turned to Pyrocles? How may that well be, since, when thou wert Zelmane, the despair thou mightest not be thus did most torment me? Thou hast then the victory, use it with virtue. Thy virtue won me, with virtue preserve me. Dost thou love me? Keep me, then, still worthy to be loved. Then held she her tongue, and cast down a self-accusing look, finding that in herself she had, as it were, shot out of the bow of her affection a more quick opening of her mind than she minded to have done. But Pyrocles, so carried up with joy that he did not envy the god's felicity, presented her with some jewels of right princely value, as some little tokens of his love and quality, and withal showed her letters from his father, King Euarchus, unto him, which even in the sea had amongst his jewels been preserved. But little needed those proofs to one who would have fallen out with herself rather than make any contrary conjectures to Zelmane's speeches, so that with such embracements as it seemed their souls desired to meet, and their hearts to kiss, as their mouths did, they passed the promise of marriage, which fain Pyrocles would have sealed with the chief arms of her desire, but Philoclea commanded the contrary. Then did Pyrocles, without disguise, and at Philoclea's entreaty, tell the story of her life, from the time of his departing from Erona, and though he knew that this discourse was but to entertain him from a more straight parley, yet he durst not but kiss his rod, and gladly make much of his entertainment. Sweet princess of my life, said he, what trophies, what triumphs, what monuments, what histories might ever make my fame yield so sweet a music to my ears, as that it pleaseth you to lend your mind to the knowledge of anything touching Pyrocles, only therefore of value because he is your Pyrocles. And therefore grow I now so proud as to think it worth the hearing, since you vouchsafe to give it the hearing. Therefore, only height of my hope, vouchsafe to know that after the death of Tiridates, and settling Erona in her government, for settled we left her, howsoever since, as I perceive by your speech the last day, ungrateful treason of her ill-chosen husband overthrew her, a thing in truth never till this time by me either heard or suspected. For who could think, without having such a mind as Antiphilus, that so great a beauty as Erona's, indeed excellent, could not have held his affection? So great goodness could not have bound gratefulness, and high advancement could not have satisfied his ambition? But therefore, true it is that wickedness may well be compared to a bottomless pit, into which it is far easier to keep oneself from falling than, being fallen, to give oneself any stay from falling infinitely. But for my cousin and me, upon this cause we parted from Erona. Euardes, the brave and mighty prince whom it was my fortune to kill in the combat for Erona, had 3 nephews, sons to a sister of his, all 3 set among the foremost ranks of fame for great minds to attempt, and great force to perform what they did attempt, especially the eldest, by name Anaxius, to whom all men would willingly have yielded the height of praise, but that his nature was such as to bestow it upon himself before any could give it. For of so unsupportable a pride he was, that where his deeds might well stir envy, his demeanour did rather breed disdain. And if it be true that the giants ever made war against heaven, he had been a fit ensign-bearer for that company, for nothing seemed hard to him, though impossible, and nothing unjust, while his liking was his justice. Now he in these wars had flatly refused his aid, because he could not brook that the worthy Prince Plangus was by his cousin Tiridates preferred before him, for allowing no other weights but the sword and spear in judging of desert, how much he esteemed himself before Plangus in that, so much would he have had his allowance in his service. But now that he understood that his uncle was slain by me, I think rather scorn that any should kill his uncle than any kindness, an unused guest to an arrogant soul, made him seek his revenge, I must confess in manner gallant enough. For he sent a challenge unto me to meet him at a place appointed in the confines of the kingdom of Lydia, where he would approve upon me that I had by some treachery overcome his uncle, whom else many hundreds such as I could not have withstood. Youth and success made me willing enough to accept any such bargain, especially because I heard that your cousin Amphialus, who for some years hath borne universally the name of the best knight in the world, had divers times fought with him, and never been able to master him, but so had left him, that every man thought Anaxius, in that one virtue of courtesy far short of him, in all other his match, Anaxius still deeming himself for his superior. Therefore to him I would go, and I would needs go alone, because so I understood for certain he was, and, I must confess, desirous to do something without the company of the incomparable Prince Musidorus, because in my heart I acknowledged that I owed more to his presence than to anything in myself whatever before I had done. For of him, indeed, as of any worldly cause I must grant as received, whatever there is or may be good in me. He taught me by word, and best by example, giving me in him so lively an image of virtue, as ignorance could not cast such a mist over mine eyes, as not to see and to love it, and all with such dear friendship and care as, O Heaven, how can my life ever requite to him? Which made me indeed find in myself such a kind of depending upon him, as without him I found a weakness and a mistrustfulness of myself, as one stayed from his best strength, when at any time I missed him, which humour perceiving to overrule me, I strave against it. Not that I was unwilling to depend upon him in judgment, but my weakness I would not, which, though it held me to him, made me unworthy of him. Therefore I desired his leave, and obtained it, such confidence he had in me, preferring my reputation before his own tenderness. And so privately went from him, he determining, as after I knew, in secret manner, not to be far from the place where we appointed to meet, to prevent any foul play that might be offered unto me. Full loath was Erona to let us depart from her, as it were, forefeeling the harms which after fell to her. Passing through a land full of timber trees, where I might look for no companions but the wild burgesses of the forest, I heard cries coming by pauses to mine ears from a gentleman, whom I found bound and stripped from his waist upwards, who was continually pricked by 9 gentlewomen. Truly such they were handsome, who held bodkins in their hands, and who said they were executing vengeance on this naughty man for deceiving women, who had said there was no inconstancy to change one love to another, but great constancy. Therefore, said they, we are about to mangle him, so that he shall have lost his credit for beauty. His name is Pamphilus. Him I rescued from these gentlewomen and their servants, and as I did so, speaking with one lady who had told this story, named Dido, who thus would have punished this false Aeneas, there comes a number of his friends, and I was forced to forsake the ensign under which I had served, and spend my uttermost force in protecting her. And so I, leaving her in a place of security, as she thought, went on my journey towards Anaxius, for whom I was fain to stay 2 days in the appointed place, he disdaining to wait for me till he was sure I were there. I did patiently abide his angry pleasure, till about that space of time he came, indeed, according to promise, alone. And as soon as ever he came near me in fit distance for his purpose, he, with much fury, but with fury skilfully guided, ran upon me, which I, in the best sort I could, resisted, having kept myself ready for him, because I had understood that he observed few compliments in matter of arms, but such as a proud anger did indite unto him. And so, putting our horses into a full career, we hit each other upon the head with our lances. I think he felt my blow. For my part, I must confess I never received the like, but I think, though my senses were astonied, my mind forced them to quicken themselves, because I had learned of him how little favour he is wont to show in any matter of advantage. And indeed he was turned and coming upon me with his sword drawn, both our stays having been broken at that encounter. But I was so ready to answer him that truly I know not who gave the first blow. But whosoever gave the first was quickly seconded by the second. And indeed, excellentest lady, I must say true, for a time it was well fought between us, he undoubtedly being of singular valour. I would God it were not abased by his too much loftiness. But as, by the occasion of the combat, winning and losing ground, we changed places, his horse happened to come upon the point of the broken spear, which, fallen to the ground, chanced to stand upward, so as it lighting upon his heart, the horse died. He, driven to dismount, threatened, if I did not the like, to do as much for my horse as fortune had done for his. But whether for that, or because I would not be beholding to fortune for any part of the victory, I descended. So began our foot fight in such sort that we were well entered to blood of both sides, when there comes by that unconstant Pamphilus, whom I had delivered, easy to be known, for he was barefaced, with 12 armed men after him. But before him he had Dido, that lady who had most sharply punished him, riding upon a palfrey, he following her with most unmanlike cruelty, beating her with wands he had in his hand, she crying for sense of pain or hope of succour, which was so pitiful a sight unto me that it moved me to require Anaxius to defer our combat till another day, and now to perform the duties of knighthood in helping this distressed lady. But he, that disdains to obey anything but his passion, which he calls his mind, bade me leave off that thought, but when he had killed me he would then perhaps go to her succour. But I, well finding the fight would be long between us, longing in my heart to deliver poor Dido, giving him so great a blow as somewhat stayed him, to term it aright, I flatly ran away from him toward my horse, who, trotting after the company, in mine armour I was put to some pain, but that use made me nimble unto it. But as I followed my horse, Anaxius followed me. But his proud heart did so disdain that exercise that I had quickly overrun him and overtaken my horse, being, I must confess, ashamed to see a number of country folks, who happened to pass thereby, who hallooed and hooted after me, as at the arrantest coward that ever showed his shoulders to his enemy. But when I had leapt on my horse, with such speedy agility that they all cried, "Oh, see how fear gives him wings!" I turned to Anaxius, and aloud promised him to return thither again as soon as I had relieved the injured lady. But he, railing at me with all the base words angry contempt could indite, I said no more but, "Anaxius, assure thyself I neither fear thy force nor thy opinion." And so, using no weapon of a knight as at that time but my spurs, I ran, in my knowledge after Pamphilus, but in all their conceits from Anaxius, which, as far as I could hear, I might well hear testified with such laughters and games that I was some few times moved to turn back again.
The lady's misery overbalanced my reputation, and after her I went, and released her from Pamphilus and his friends, injurious wretches, most of whom carried news to the other world, that amongst men secret wrongs are not always left unpunished, Pamphilus escaping in the rearward. The lady invited me to her father's castle, one of good strength, having a great moat about it, the work of a noble gentleman, of whose unthrifty son, the father of Dido, one Cremes, a drivelling old fellow, lean, shaking of both hands, already half in earth, yet then most greedy of earth, had bought it. He would scarcely give me thanks for what I had done, but talked of nothing but his poverty, for fear belike I should prove a borrower. His house was bare, a picture of rich beggary, served with rustical villains full of sweat and dust, and all his preparations would make one detest niggardliness, it is so slushish a vice. This Cremus, I found, would have sold me to Queen Artaxia, I having slain her brother Tiridates, and she offering 100,000 crowns for my head. So he surrounded me with his clowns, some upon cart jades, to bear me on my way, which I might have suspected, as a churl's courtesy rarely comes but either for gain or falsehood, until I found myself in the midst of a great troop of enemies, who willed me to yield myself to the Queen Artaxia. But they could not have used worse eloquence, so, making my necessity both my sword and my shield, I made what use I could of my other weapons to cut my way through them, Cremus having withdrawn, gilding his wicked conceits with the hope of gain. But I was grown so weary that I supported myself more with anger than strength, when the most excellent Musidorus came to my succour, who, having followed my trace as well as he could, after he found I had left the fight with Anaxius, came to the niggard's castle, where he found all burned and spoiled by the country people, who bear mortal hatred to that covetous man, and now took the time, when the castle was left almost without guard, to come in and leave monuments of their malice therein. Which Musidorus, not staying either to further or impeach, came upon the spur after me, because with one voice many told him that if I were in his company, it was for no good meant unto me, and in this extremity found me. But when I saw that cousin of mine, methought my life was doubled, and where I before thought of a noble death, I now thought of a noble victory. For who can fear that hath Musidorus by him, who, what he did there for me, how many he killed, not stranger for the number than for the strange blows wherewith he sent them to a well-deserved death, might well delight me to speak of, but I should so hold you too long in every particular. But in truth there, if ever, and ever if ever any man, did Musidorus show himself second to none in able valour. Yet what the unmeasurable excess of their number would have done in the end I know not, but the trial thereof was cut off by the chanceful coming thither of the king of Iberia, that same father of the worthy Plangus, whom it hath pleased you sometimes to mention, who, not yielding over to old age his country delights, especially of hawking, was at that time following a Merlin, brought to see this injury offered unto us, and having great numbers of courtiers waiting upon him, was straight known by the soldiers that assaulted us to be their king, and so most of them withdrew themselves. He, by his authority, knowing of the captain's own constrained confession what was the motive of this mischievous practice, misliking much such violence should be offered in his country to men of our rank, but chiefly disdaining it should be done in respect of his niece, whom, I must confess wrongfully, he hated, because he interpreted that her brother and she had maintained his son Plangus against him, caused the captain's head presently to be stricken off, and the old bad Cremus to be hanged, though truly for my part I earnestly laboured for his life, because I had eaten of his bread. But one thing was notable for a conclusion of his miserable life, that neither the death of his daughter, who alas, poor gentlewoman, was by chance slain among his clowns, while she, over boldly for her weak sex, sought to hold them from me, nor yet his own shameful end was so much in his mouth as he was led to execution, as the loss of his goods and burning of his house, which often, with more laughter than tears of the hearers, he made pitiful exclamations upon. This justice thus done, and we delivered, the king, indeed in royal sort, invited us to his court, not far thence, in all points entertaining us so as truly I must ever acknowledge a beholdingness unto him, although the stream of it fell out not to be so sweet as the spring. For after some days being there, curing ourselves of such wounds as we had received, while I, causing diligent search to be made of Anaxius, could learn nothing but that he was gone out of the country, boasting in every place how he had made me run away, we were brought to receive the favour of acquaintance with this Queen Andromana, whom the Princess Pamela did in so lively colours describe the last day, as still, methinks, the figure thereof possesseth mine eyes, confirmed by the knowledge myself had. End of Book 2, Part 4.